Sansa Stark's coronation in the Great September of King's Landing was unlike any ceremony the realm had ever seen. The skies were a chalky gray, the sun obscured by thin clouds that lent the day a hushed, almost secretive cast. The dragonbit had been an option, for the lords and ladies whispered of how many who once held a throne were crowned in the Red Keep or in the rubble of that ancient dome, but Sansa had insisted upon the Great September's reconstruction, determined to honor the old ways of King's Landing while forging a new path. Pillars still bore the fresh white marble shipped in from across the narrow sea, and the smell of new mortar hung in the air. Though the scaffolding was barely down, hundreds of witnesses packed themselves between the columns, each craning to see how a northern lady could possibly bear the mantle of the south. Yet Sansa's steps, slow and measured, conveyed the certainty she had so carefully cultivated over the years. This was not a frightened girl walking to marry a man she didn't choose. This was a woman who had survived horrors, losses, and betrayals, determined to build a better realm. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, a color that echoed the crisp, cold nights of the north, though the design itself was cut to flatter the fashions of King's Landing, slender sleeves ending in a flourish at the wrists, a slim belt of silver leaves that cinched her waist, and a train that rippled like water behind her. At her throat rested a delicate torque of dire wolf heads intertwined with golden roses, a symbol reminiscent of her mixed heritage and an homage to those who had assisted her rise. Queen in the South, they called her now, a title that once would have sounded absurd. The realm had witnessed Daenerys Targaryen's fiery claim, Cersei Lannister's iron rule, and Margaery Tyrell's clever ascent. They were all gone. Yet Sansa remained, not ruling the North, where she had passed her rightful place to a cousin more suited to those cold stones, but in the southern seat of power, ironically recognized for her skill in diplomacy, in bridging divides, and in sparing the capital another wave of destruction. As she approached the altar where the High Septon, newly chosen by the faith's humble and devout, stood, her mind flickered to the faces of those she had lost. She imagined her father's proud but gentle smile, her mother's stern nod of approval, her brother Robb's commanding stance. She imagined Arya's dagger glinting in the candlelight, Bran with his solemn eyes, and Rickon's laughter echoing through Winterfell's halls. Sansa could practically feel the North at her back, strong and unyielding, but it was not anger that steeled her. It was an acceptance of all she'd lived through, a knowledge that the woman who bowed her head to receive a crown of shimmering steel and bright emeralds was shaped by 1,000 heartbreaks and lessons. The High Septon spoke the words, calling upon the Seven for their blessing on this new queen. And as he lowered the crown onto Sansa's gleaming auburn hair, she closed her eyes and listened to the hush fall over the crowd. The hush was not merely respect. It was wonder, and perhaps a taste of fear. For who could guess what a Stark would do in King's Landing once crowned? When she turned to face her new subjects, she did so without a broad smile. Her expression was serene, regal, and tempered by the experiences that had taught her the devastating cost of power. Soft candlelight from the Great September's elaborate chandeliers danced along her cheekbones and highlighted her eyes, which glowed with the reflected flames. In that moment, many who looked upon Sansa Stark thought her the most beautiful sight in the realm, but they also sensed the steel beneath. She was no mere rose to be plucked and pinned by a king. She was a queen forged in the snows of Winterfell, tempered by the cunning of King's Landing, and anointed by the faith for her people. As the ceremony concluded with a chorus of the devout singing a song of blessing, Sansa stepped down from the dais and walked the aisle between lords and ladies. She greeted each face with a nod of acknowledgement, never lingering too long on any one person. A hush still prevailed, broken only by the faint echoes of the choir. Then, outside, a flurry of cheers erupted. The small folk, the ones whose fields had been burned or whose children had starved under previous reigns, sensed a stirring of hope. Rumor had it that the Lady of Winterfell had a kind heart. Rumor had it that she had learned from the cruelties inflicted upon her and now harbored a resolve to protect the innocent. The small folk did not know Sansa Stark intimately, but they were prepared to believe in her. She emerged onto the steps of the Great September, where the newly polished stones glimmered with a faint sheen of moisture from the day's earlier drizzle. Thousands crowded the plaza, gazing at the woman who would hold the power that had once belonged to Targaryens and Lannisters alike. Behind Sansa stood Ser Brienne of Tarth, newly named Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard, a singular presence in her gleaming white armor, battered shield strapped to her broad back. On the opposite side, Tyrion Lannister stood with hands folded, his expression pensive. Once, he had been Sansa's husband, though that union never fully blossomed. Now he served as her hand, an alliance of necessity forged by mutual respect. Below them all was the city of King's Landing, battered by war and dragonfire, but not yet broken. Sansa raised her arms, letting her sleeves shimmer in the daylight, and the people below cried out. Some chanted her name, while others simply watched in silence. She knew she could not banish all their fears overnight. She remembered too well that the city had been promised benevolent rule before, only to see it twist into violence. But she would do what she must to keep the city alive. Perhaps she could never banish all the scars of conflict, but she could at least prevent new ones from forming. And as she gazed upon the masses, she whispered too softly for anyone but herself to hear, "I will not fail them." That promise resonated in her heart as she led her retinue down the steps and across the plaza to the waiting carriage that would take her to the Red Keep. She contemplated walking through the city, letting the people see her up close, but her advisors had protested. The streets were not secure, not yet. There were rumors of loyalists from every corner. Targaryen loyalists who still believed Daenerys would return from death, Lannister loyalists furious at what the Starks had done, even some Baratheon diehards who held onto the memory of Robert. Sansa had grown used to the knowledge of potential danger. Every breath of her life in King's Landing had been steeped in the risk of violence. Even if her station as queen now granted her a sort of shield, she would not be naive enough to believe it. She stepped into the carriage, and Ser Brienne closed the door behind her. The roads through the city were lined with guards sporting her newly designed sigil, the direwolf of House Stark, but outlined in golden trim and with a rose motif in the corners for House Tyrell. A tribute to Marjorie and the fleeting alliance that had once saved Sansa from the total despair of court life. As she gazed out the carriage window, Sansa noted the burned-out shells of houses still standing, blackened timbers leaning precariously. There were fewer each day, thanks to her efforts to rebuild, but the scars were plain. Children with dirty faces stood on corners, their expressions guarded. Some would lift a hand in tentative greeting, and Sansa would wave back, her heart twisting. The city had been ravaged repeatedly, yet these children were still here, surviving, hoping. She realized then that she must succeed for their sake. The illusions of a carefree court vanished. The South was now her home, her responsibility. She thought back to the day the lords had approached her with the proposition to stand as queen in the South. Bran, her strange and otherworldly brother, had chosen to remain in the North, though not as a traditional king. He was more a guide, a caretaker of the old ways, a presence that transcended the typical rulership. Yet the realm needed stability. The North yearned for independence, which Sansa had once embraced wholeheartedly. But the South was fractured, vulnerable, and needed a steady hand who understood the game. Daenerys's terrifying destruction had left fear in many hearts, and though the Stormlands were battered, the Reach was leaderless, and Dorne was restless, they still looked to King's Landing as the center of power. So the lords, along with the remnants of the small council, had called upon Sansa, the last known figure with a legitimate claim, through her Tully mother, through her father's proud Stark lineage, through her marriages that connected her to the South, and, perhaps above all, because of the cunning she had displayed in orchestrating various alliances. Her gentle but unyielding manner had convinced them she was no tyrant. Their logic was as cold as it was hopeful. If she could survive Joffrey, outwit Littlefinger, and endure Ramsay, perhaps she could outmaneuver their foes and salvage the realm. Sansa had not accepted lightly, but after weeks of deliberation and conversation with Tyrion, Brienne, and others, she had chosen to take up the mantle. The carriage rattled over the uneven cobblestones, passing beneath a half-rebuilt gate. She glimpsed the towering shape of the Red Keep, half-shrouded by massive canvas tarps and scaffolding. Reconstruction was ongoing there as well. Sansa had demanded that the laborers focus first on the people's homes, the city walls, and the Great September, rather than lavish repairs on the royal residence. She would not sit in comfort while her people starved or huddled in ruins. Though it unnerved her to see the cracks in the keep's walls, it felt more honest. Power should not exist in pristine isolation, untouched by the devastation that racked the realm. By the time the carriage rolled into the courtyard, the pale sun was already starting to sink toward the rooftops. The royal guard formed two neat lines, and Sansa disembarked, drawing herself up, remembering to keep her chin high. Courtiers, officials, and petitioners awaited her. Some were eager to present pleas about their lands, their lost fortunes, or their need for justice. Others merely wanted to catch a glimpse of their new queen and weigh her bearing, gauge her character. Over the years, Sansa had learned that everything in King's Landing was performance. The moment you forgot you were on stage, you risked losing your life. Yet she also knew that behind every performance lay truth. The people's hunger, their grief, their dashed hopes. She was determined to be a queen who never forgot. She ascended the steps, nodding to the guards, and entered the Red Keep. Tyrion, ever watchful, guided her to the throne room, where a smaller ceremony awaited her. The Iron Throne itself, that monstrous seat forged from 1,000 blades, had been destroyed in the last battles. Melted by dragon fire and shattered. Now a new throne stood in its place, simpler in design, forged from steel shipped from the Vale, hammered into elegant spirals that suggested unity rather than conquest. Sansa recognized the skilled craftsmanship of Gendry Baratheon, the bastard-turned-blacksmith, who had inherited the remnants of Robert's forges. The seat was high-backed, comfortable enough for a queen, but lacking the sharp edges that once tore kings. She allowed herself a small, inward smile at the symbolism. Stepping onto the elevated dais, she turned to face the crowd. Her first official court was modest in number but heavy with significance. There were lords from the Reach, come to see how this northern queen would treat them. They were painfully aware of the Tyrell downfall and the shifting alliances that had left their lands leaderless. Standing next to them were envoys from the Stormlands, their armor still bearing the stag of Baratheon, though that house's rightful heirs were gone or scattered. Nearby, a delegation from Dorne wore their distinctive colors, their expressions guarded and proud. And then there were the Crownland's lords, the few who had survived the wars and remained loyal, or so they claimed. In the far corner, Sansa saw a group of common petitioners, peasants who had likely risked all to come forward with pleas for help. She would hear them too as soon as she could. The crowd sank into bows and curtsies. The hush was broken by the faint echoes of footsteps, and then Tyrion stepped forward. "My queen," he said, his voice carrying well in the hush, "we stand before you to pledge our loyalty, to present the matters of state that require your wisdom, and to ask that you guide us to a future free from the atrocities of the past." Sansa acknowledged his words with a slight nod. She hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing her first official words. "I accept this throne not to rest upon past glories," she said, her voice clear. "I accept it with full knowledge of the burdens it brings. I vow to serve the realm, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to heal what has been broken. In the days to come, we will labor side by side, for only together can we mend what war has shattered." A soft murmur spread through the hall. Sansa knew she must never appear too weak or too lenient. Cersei had once told her that tears were not a woman's only weapon. But Sansa also knew that cruelty could be a ruler's downfall. She resolved to walk a tightrope of compassion and resolve. She beckoned the lords from the Reach first, inviting them to speak. They approached, bowing low. Their leader, a tall, stooped man in his 50s, introduced himself as Lord Rowan. He spoke of the farmland that had been burned, the people displaced, the urgent need for seeds and supplies to ensure the next harvest. Sansa listened intently, her mind already turning over possibilities. The gold in the treasury was meager, but she had alliances with merchants in Pentos who might be persuaded to help, given fair terms. She promised to consider their pleas and to craft a plan that would set the fields of the Reach back in motion. Next came the Stormlands envoys. They had fewer demands and more wariness, for they believed the monarchy had failed them. They sought permission to refortify certain holds along the coast. Sansa took note, cautioning them that while she understood their need for security, she would not tolerate any new warlords rising to challenge the fragile peace. She could sense their grudging respect, for though she was young, her voice carried authority. The Dornish delegation stepped forward after that, their leader wearing the flowing orange and gold robes typical of the southernmost kingdom. Dorne had long prided itself on its independence, but they had taken grievous losses under the Targaryen queen, and were now forced to come to King's Landing to see if any new threat rose against them. Sansa assured them she had no designs to subjugate Dorne further, only to ensure peace. Their eyes gleamed with something akin to curiosity. Perhaps they were surprised by her courtesy, or perhaps they believed they saw her cunning, a cunning reminiscent of her mother's family, the Tullis, or the sly brilliance that once belonged to the Tyrells. They said little, but Sansa felt their watchful gaze. She had grown used to the sensation of being observed, dissected. She responded with gentle warmth, enough to suggest she sought amity, but also enough distance to remind them she was not naive. Eventually, the official delegations yielded to the common folk who had gathered. Their pleas were heart-wrenching: lost children, crops burned, fishermen turned beggars because of destroyed fleets. For each petition, Sansa offered measured responses. She did not pretend she could solve everything at once, but she detailed how relief efforts would be organized, how certain funds would be allocated, and how local lords would be held accountable for ensuring the people's well-being. She spoke with empathy, yet her tone left no doubt she expected accountability. She would not let the lords hoard gold while their subjects starved. In doing so, she risked angering some of the more unscrupulous lords, but so be it. Better that she set a clear standard now than allow injustice to fester. Each time she glanced at Tyrion, who listened in silence, occasionally offering a subtle nod. Court dragged on for hours, and by the end, Sansa felt the weight of the crown pressing on her temples. When the last petitioner left, she dismissed the gathering, instructing the lords to remain in the city a few more days while she conferred with her council. With bows and curtsies, they departed. Sansa allowed herself a moment to breathe. Brienne approached, her expression concerned. "Your Grace, you must be exhausted," the knight said gently in that practical tone that Sansa so appreciated. "I am," Sansa admitted. "But I will endure. We all must." Brienne stayed by her side as she made her way down the corridor to the royal solar where Tyrion waited with parchment, quills, and wine. The windows overlooked the city, the orange glow of late afternoon casting long shadows across the half-rebuilt towers. Sansa sank into a chair, letting out a small sigh. Tyrion poured her a goblet of wine. "Your Grace," he said with a wry smile, "we have much to discuss." Sansa arched an eyebrow. "We always do." He unfurled a map of the 7 kingdoms, placing small figurines to mark trouble spots. Lawless bands in the Riverlands, scattered Ironborn raiders, and rumors of an uprising in the Westerlands. The conversation turned technical. They spoke of supply lines, coin shortages, possible alliances with the Vale or Bravos. The realm was a jigsaw puzzle of broken pieces. For every measure of progress, half a dozen new challenges appeared. But Sansa remained calm, methodical. She had studied politics under the worst teachers: Cersei, Littlefinger, Joffrey. She knew how to parse a threat, how to read a lie. Tyrion was a skilled ally, adept at strategy, though he bore the guilt of his family's deeds. But Sansa did not blame him for all the Lannisters had done. They were beyond the trivialities of old grudges. They had real dangers to face. When the candlelight burned low, Tyrion finally closed the map. "We'll pick this up tomorrow, Your Grace. You should rest." Sansa glanced at the flickering flame. She was indeed tired, but she had grown used to a state of near exhaustion. Nevertheless, she nodded. "Thank you. I'll see you at dawn." Tyrion bowed and made his exit, leaving Sansa with the faint echo of her own footsteps in the quiet solar. She called for a servant to escort her to her chambers. Those rooms still smelled of fresh plaster, a faint tang of paint lingering in the air. The old rooms had been too damaged to restore, so she had chosen the simpler suite, wanting to distance herself from the ghosts of the past. Inside, she found a basin of warm water waiting. She removed her crown, setting it gently on a table. The silver and emerald circlet gleamed with an almost hypnotic intensity, reminding her that power could be alluring. She dipped her hands in the basin, savoring the warmth, and then splashed water on her face. The reflection in the mirror was a woman with tired eyes, but eyes that still held a flicker of hope. She dried her face and turned to see Brienne standing at the threshold. "I shall stand guard, Your Grace," Brienne said. Sansa smiled softly, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Sir Brienne. I rest easier knowing you're here." The tall knight nodded, stepping back to allow Sans a privacy. When Sansa finally lay down on her bed, she felt the day's weariness sink into her bones, but she could not sleep just yet. Her mind churned with visions of the realm, of the people still waiting for justice. She closed her eyes and pictured Winterfell's Godwood, the weirwood's red leaves whispering in the northern wind. She remembered her mother's stories of the Tully words: family, duty, honor, and how those values guided a life of service. They were guiding her even now, though she was far from the north. Eventually, weariness overcame her and she drifted off into a dreamless slumber. Morning arrived with the distant cry of gulls along the Blackwater Bay. Sansa woke early, as was her habit. She dressed in a simpler gown, pale green with silver embroidery, and braided her auburn hair into a single plait. The crown stayed behind. This was her day to walk among the reconstruction projects, to show the people she did not intend to rule from an ivory tower. Tyrion and Brienne accompanied her, along with a small contingent of guards. They left the keep on foot, moving through the city's winding streets. Residents paused in their tasks to stare. Some bowed hastily, others simply gaped. Queen or not, Sansa sensed their lingering mistrust. Only time would prove her intentions. She visited a site where laborers were rebuilding a small sept that had been burned in the last conflict. The structure was plain, no high steeples or ornate glass, but it was a start. She praised their efforts, asking the foreman what they needed most. Tools, the woman replied, removing her cap to wipe her brow. And more able hands. Many men fled or died. We do what we can with the few we have. Sansa nodded. I will see that more tools are allocated here. Spread word that the crown welcomes any seeking honest work in reconstruction. Wages will be fair. She glanced at Tyrion, who made a note. The foreman bowed, gratitude evident in her eyes. Next, they passed a small soup station sponsored by the faith, where hungry children and elders lined up, clutching bowls. Sansa's heart ached to see the desperation on their faces. She greeted them gently, assuring them that she would work to ensure they did not go hungry. Inside, she was keenly aware that such promises were easy to make and far harder to keep. But she would try. She had to. She crossed from one district to the next until she reached a row of charred ruins that once comprised a bustling marketplace. Only a handful of stalls remained, selling meager produce or dried fish. A merchant, seeing the queen approach, straightened at once, bowing deeply. Your Grace, if it pleases you, I have some fresh fruit from the riverlands. He held out a wooden bowl of small, slightly bruised apples. Sansa took one, turning it over in her hand. They look fine, she said, and handed him a few coins in exchange. She bit into the apple, the tart juice surprising her. The merchant grinned. It was a small moment of shared humanity in a city that had seen too much horror. As she continued on, she offered a piece of the apple to a wide-eyed child who stood behind his mother's skirts. He looked at his mother for permission, then took it shyly. A spark of something like hope flashed in his face. At midday, Sansa and her entourage stopped by a makeshift camp just inside the city walls, a place where refugees from the war gathered. Tents of threadbare cloth, lean-tos of wood scraps, and hastily erected shelters dotted the muddy ground. The smell was less than pleasant. Children chased each other through puddles. Women and men stood in lines to collect water from a half-broken pump. Sansa approached slowly, her gaze sweeping over the scene. She felt a surge of resolve. The monarchy would allocate funds to create proper housing for these people. She had no illusions it would be quick or easy, resources were stretched thin across the realm. But ignoring them was not an option. A small group of refugees crowded around her, some daring to speak. My lady, your grace. One man began, stumbling over the address. We lost everything. Our home in the Reach was burned, our farmland gone. We've come to King's Landing in hope of work. But the city. Sansa lifted a hand gently. I see your plight, truly. I cannot promise miracles, but I can promise we will do better than in the past. I intend to establish safe zones and opportunities for labor throughout the city. There is rebuilding in every district, and we need workers. We'll see to it that children have at least some measure of shelter and food. It will take time, but I will not forget you. She paused, looking into his tired eyes. Nor will I forget your children. The man nodded, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. Thank you, your grace. Sansa spent the better part of an hour speaking with the refugees, gathering stories of what they had endured. Some were suspicious, still angry at any ruler who made promises. Others were desperate, clinging to whatever hope she offered. She listened, letting them share their grief. Then she excused herself, feeling the weight of all those sorrows. Tyrion walked beside her, his features etched with concern. You cannot heal the entire realm alone, Sansa, he said quietly, reverting to a less formal address in their private moment. No, she replied, but I can try to mend what I can. And for that, I'll need help. I'll need you, I'll need the lords, and I'll need time. They returned to the keep in the afternoon, where Sansa convened a small council meeting. Aside from Tyrion as Hand, Brienne as Lord Commander, and a handful of other trusted advisors, the council was still forming. She wanted to choose people who understood the cost of war, who cared about justice. No longer would the small council be a nest of vipers jockeying for advantage if she could help it. That afternoon, they discussed the distribution of grain, the forging of new coins, and the negotiations with the Iron Bank. The hours slipped by as they debated policies meant to stabilize the city and the neighboring territories. By the end of the session, tempers were frayed, but Sansa managed to secure compromises. She dismissed them, reminding each to return with written proposals in the morning. Once the council had filtered out, she lingered in the chamber with Tyrion, the light of dusk casting elongated shadows. "We need to ensure these proposals become real," Sansa said, her tone weary. "If the lords sense weakness, they'll ignore our orders." Tyrion sipped from a goblet of watered wine. "Which is why we must present a united front. A queen who listens but does not bend to every whim. You handled yourself well today. Some of them are already murmuring about your compassion, but they will also test your strength soon." Sansa allowed herself a small, tight smile. "If they wish to test my strength, they should remember I was raised in the north. We Starks have our ways." Tyrion inclined his head. "Indeed. Speaking of your northern ways, I received a raven from Winterfell." He handed her a sealed letter. Sansa took it, her heart fluttering. News from the north always stirred conflicting emotions. Longing, regret, love. She broke the seal and read quickly. It was from her cousin, young Lord Stark, who had been chosen by the northern lords to handle affairs now that Bran walked a more mystical path. The letter was brief but informative. The north was stable for the moment, rebuilding. Winterfell's harvest had been surprisingly bountiful. The letter ended with an invitation for Sansa to visit, should her duties permit. She pressed her lips together, uncertain if she could leave King's Landing so soon. But a part of her yearned to see the north again, to walk through Winterfell's halls, to feel the cold wind on her face. She set the letter aside. "Perhaps soon," she murmured. "But not yet. The south needs me." Tyrion nodded. "I understand. The realm stands on a knife's edge of hope and chaos. When you do go, I'll ensure the city remains in capable hands." He bowed slightly and left, leaving her to her thoughts. A few days passed in a blur of audiences, council sessions, and countless minor crises. Sansa's determination never wavered, but she could feel the stress mounting. Word came from the Westerlands that certain former Lannister bannermen did not acknowledge her rule, claiming she was a usurper, no better than the Targaryen who had brought dragonfire down on their heads. She dispatched messengers and envoys, hoping to negotiate before bloodshed erupted anew. In the Riverlands, outlaws continued to raid villages. Sansa sent the city guard and some northern volunteers to quell the violence, instructing them to remember mercy whenever possible. Slowly, piece by piece, she tried to hold the realm together. Throughout all this, she was aware of a mounting tension behind closed doors. Some of the older lords, especially those who had thrived under previous regimes, resented a queen they deemed the wolf in the south. Sansa heard whispered rumors that they might conspire to undermine her. She saw the narrowed eyes, the perfunctory bows, the tight smiles. But she also saw the look of relief on the faces of commoners when she decreed that city taxes should not cripple the poor, or when she demanded that bread prices remain fair. The small folk had grown weary of cruelty. They wanted a queen who at least remembered their existence. Sansa was not naive enough to think that love from the small folk alone could protect her from daggers in the dark, but it was a start. One late evening, after yet another long day of governance, Sansa found herself walking the Red Keep's battlements, seeking a moment of solitude. The sky was brushed with the faded indigo of twilight, and torches dotted the courtyard below. A mild breeze carried the scents of the city, sea salt, cooking fires, and a faint staleness from the canal. Brienne walked at her side, a respectful half-pace behind. Every so often, a guard saluted or bowed as they passed. Pausing at a turret, Sansa gazed out at the city. Light glimmered in scattered windows. She wondered about the countless souls down there, how many cried themselves to sleep, how many prayed for salvation, how many plotted with knives and poison. She had once been a girl who dreamt of knights and ladies, of tournaments and songs. Now she was a queen who knew the harsh realities behind those songs. Her illusions had been stripped away, leaving only the determination to create a better world than the one she had grown up in. Brienne cleared her throat softly. "Your Grace, are you all right?" Sansa glanced at the knight. She remembered how Brienne had sworn herself to Lady Catelyn, how she had tried to protect Sansa from the horrors of the world. "Some days I wonder if anyone could be all right in this place," Sansa replied gently. "But I have purpose. That keeps me going." Brienne nodded, a flicker of empathy in her usually stoic blue eyes. "I wish I could spare you these burdens." Sansa shook her head. "I wouldn't trust anyone else to bear them." My father taught me about duty. My mother taught me about love and loyalty. I carry them both in my heart." She paused, exhaling softly. "Go rest if you wish, Sir Brienne. I'd like a moment alone. I promise I won't wander." Brienne hesitated, but Sansa's gentle tone was insistent. With a short bow, she stepped back, still within a distant watchful range but allowing Sansa some semblance of privacy. Sansa leaned against the stone crenellation, her eyes drifting to the horizon where the moonlight shimmered on the distant waters of Blackwater Bay. The silence of the night offered a fragile refuge from the daily pressures. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze caress her cheeks. For a moment, she imagined she was in the Godwood at Winterfell, hearing the wind in the pines instead of the seagulls. A pang of homesickness struck her. Yet she knew her place was here for now. In her reverie, she did not hear the soft footfalls until they were nearly upon her. She turned to see Tyrion approaching, wearing a subdued cloak. He gave a polite bow. "My queen," he said lightly, "I saw you slip away from the council chambers. I suspected you might be up here." Sansa managed a small smile. "Tyrion, I needed some air." He joined her at the battlements, resting his hands on the cold stone. For a moment, they both stared out at the city. "I remember a time when you dreaded being in King's Landing," Tyrion said quietly. She snorted softly. "I still dread it some days, but duty calls." She studied his face, noticing the lines of weariness beneath his eyes. "And you, my hand, are you well?" He shrugged. "As well as one can be. Each day brings fresh dilemmas, fresh deals to broker, fresh crises to avert. But I suppose I prefer this to war." "Likewise," Sansa agreed. They stood in companionable silence for a few heartbeats before she spoke again. "I sometimes wonder if my father would be proud of me, ruling in the South like this. He always taught me to be honest, fair. Yet King's Landing demands certain compromises." Tyrion's gaze was sympathetic. Ned Stark was an honorable man, but he was not skilled in the intrigues of the capital. You, on the other hand, learned those intrigues firsthand. But you haven't lost your sense of honor. It's what makes the lords uncertain about you. They're not used to both cunning and conscience in one ruler. Yes, I believe Ned Stark would be proud. Sansa felt unexpected tears threatening. She blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered. The weight on her chest lifted slightly. She cleared her throat. "Soon, I think, we must make a more public move to quell the discontent in the Westerlands. Will you stand with me in that?" "Always," Tyrion said with a half-smile. "I owe my family nothing at this point. Let them see that a Lannister can stand beside a Stark to build a better future." Sansa nodded, feeling a renewed surge of resolve. She would not allow divisions to tear the kingdom apart. She knew it would be a delicate balancing act, reconciling old enemies, ensuring that the Lannister bannermen didn't rise up, and preventing the other regions from suspecting she was favoring one side. All of it was part of the labyrinth she navigated each day. But she was determined to see it through. They parted ways shortly after, and Sansa returned to her chambers. She found herself able to sleep a bit more soundly that night, as though her conversation with Tyrion had given her a measure of reassurance. When dawn broke, she rose once more, dressed in a regal burgundy gown, and prepared to hold another session of court. The day passed in petitions and negotiations, the usual swirl of King's Landing politics. Around midday, a messenger burst into the throne room, kneeling before Sansa, breathless. "Your Grace, news from the Westerlands. A gathering of Lannister loyalists has seized a small castle near Lannisport, proclaiming they will not heed a Stark queen." A chill settled over the hall. The courtiers exchanged uneasy glances. Sansa's heart pounded, but her voice remained even. "How many men do they command?" "At least 300, Your Grace. They've barricaded themselves and claim they will gather more. The local lords are terrified of open conflict." Tyrion stepped forward. "We cannot allow them to rally unopposed," he said quietly. "This could spark another war. But if we respond with open violence, we risk damaging the fragile peace." Sansa considered for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the map in her mind. "We must send envoys first. Attempt negotiation. But we will also ready a force to contain them if they refuse to stand down." She glanced at Brienne, who inclined her head, understanding the unspoken instruction. "I will not plunge the realm into bloodshed, but I will not let rebellion take root." Sternly she addressed the court. "Let it be known that this realm has seen enough war. Any who raise arms against the throne do so at the peril of peace. Yet I will show mercy to those who lay down their weapons and swear fealty once more." The day's tension rose. Advisors debated whether mercy would embolden rebels or whether severity would shatter the trust of the common folk. Sansa, unwavering, insisted on offering peaceful resolution first. If forced to fight, she would do so swiftly and decisively, minimizing casualties. That evening, she dispatched envoys, men known for tact, accompanied by a small guard. Their orders were clear: show the rebels a chance for clemency. Sansa prayed it would be enough to avoid bloodshed, but deep down she knew that war might flare up again. The old animosities ran deep, and her claim to the southern throne was not unchallenged. Over the next few days, tension hummed through the capital. The Westerlands crisis dominated every conversation. Sansa remained composed in public, never betraying the knot of worry in her stomach. She continued her daily routines, visiting reconstruction sites, hearing petitions, meeting with the council, but always with one ear pricked for news. When a raven finally arrived, carrying the envoy's report, she read it in her solar, Tyrion and Brienne at her side. She frowned at the message. The rebels, led by a minor Lannister cousin, refused all offers. They demanded Sansa relinquish the throne. They taunted her as the wolf girl who shames her family name. The letter dripped with venom and scorn. Sansa felt a pang of memory for the cruelty she endured when she was but a hostage in King's Landing. She would not let it scare her now. She passed the letter to Tyrion, who read it with a resigned shake of his head. "We should respond swiftly," Brienne urged. "Lannisport's people are frightened. If these rebels rally more forces, it could escalate." Sansa pressed her lips together. "They have chosen their path," she said softly. "We offered mercy, and they spat on it." She drew a steadying breath. "Prepare a contingent of loyal knights, a small army. Not a horde, just enough to ensure we can contain this threat. Lady Brienne, you will lead them. I trust your judgment. End this rebellion with as little bloodshed as possible." Brienne bowed, her expression firm. "Yes, your grace." Tyrion placed the letter aside. "I'll handle the logistics, supplies, payment, and perhaps we can gather some of my old acquaintances in the Westerlands who prefer stability over petty vengeance. They might help turn the tide against these rebels." Sansa nodded, feeling the old swirl of war creeping in. She had hoped to rule without further conflict, but reality was rarely so kind. "So be it," she whispered. "Let us do what must be done, quickly and cleanly." Within days, Ser Brienne departed the city with a disciplined force of about 800 knights and foot soldiers, accompanied by supply wagons and a handful of support staff. They bore the banner of the new crown, the dire wolf, traced in gold, with a subtle rose motif, and they marched under the banner of a queen who wanted peace but knew how to wage war if forced. Sansa watched them from the city gates, her heart heavy. She wanted them to return quickly, and with minimal loss of life. Her final words to Brienne had been a quiet command. "Spare them if they yield." As those soldiers vanished into the distance, Sansa turned back to face the uncertain city, where courtiers waited with bated breath, no doubt eager to see if the queen could handle an uprising. She refused to appear rattled. She resumed her duties, receiving visitors, discussing trade treaties, and pressing forward with reconstruction. Yet every night, she scanned the horizon from her chambers, imagining Brienne riding through the hills of the Westerlands. Word arrived sporadically of the arm. Wise progress. They reached certain towns near Lannisport, found them mostly cooperative, but discovered that the rebels had grown bolder, raiding supply lines. A skirmish occurred on a hillside road. 2 of Sansa's men died and 6 were wounded. The rebels lost a few, but not enough to break their spirit. Sansa swallowed her anger, urging Tyrion to continue sending ravens, reaffirming her willingness to negotiate if they surrendered. The rebels offered no reply. At last, a final raven reached King's Landing announcing the rebels had gathered in a small fortress outside Lannisport, prepared to make a stand. Ser Brienne had surrounded them, cutting off escape routes. Sansa prayed for a swift end. 2 days later, a battered messenger arrived on horseback at the Red Keep, bearing a short missive from Brienne. The fortress had fallen. A handful of rebels tried to break out but were captured. Most surrendered when they realized their hopeless situation. Casualties were relatively light and Lannisport was safe. Relief flooded Sansa as she read the report. She summoned the court and announced the end of the rebellion, praising Brienne for her leadership and commending the bravery of those who fought. At the same time, she declared that those who had surrendered would face the Queen's justice, but would be spared if they pledged loyalty anew. The older lords eyed her with guarded respect. Perhaps they saw now that this queen was not to be trifled with. She could show mercy and still crush rebellion. Weeks passed, and Brienne returned at the head of her contingent, leading a column of weary soldiers and wagons of captured rebels. The sun was high when they arrived at the capital. Sansa stood on a large platform erected outside the gates, flanked by guards and advisors as the rebels were brought forth in chains. Among them was the minor Lannister cousin who had instigated the rebellion. He was a man in his middle years, his once proud bearing wilted by defeat. Yet he managed to sneer when he met Sansa's eyes. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. You raised arms against the throne, defied a queen who offered peace. You caused bloodshed in a realm still healing. Do you have any words to speak in your defense? The man spat at the ground. A wolf has no right to rule lions. My kin would never serve a traitor. Sansa's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. Traitor, she repeated softly. I have never betrayed this realm. I have only sought to preserve it. You, on the other hand, have plunged it back into war. She glanced at Brienne, who gave a subtle nod. Confirming this was the man responsible for sending out raids on small folk as well. Sansa turned to the crowd. In the days past, such a traitor might have been beheaded or burned alive. But we aspire to be better. He and his men shall face trial. If they are found guilty, they will serve penance, rebuilding what they have destroyed. A mixture of surprise and murmurs rippled through the assembled throng. Some had expected a public execution. Others were relieved by the queen's mercy. The Lannister rebel glared but said nothing. Guards led him away in chains. Sansa breathed a quiet sigh, though it gave her no joy. She had spared his life, but she would not release him without consequence. He would labor for the realm he had tried to tear apart. She hoped that this act of tempered justice would set an example. That evening, in the Red Keep's throne room, a modest celebration took place to honor Ser Brienne and the victorious soldiers. Nothing lavish. Sansa deemed it improper to celebrate war, but enough to acknowledge their efforts. Servants lit torches and set out simple fare of roasted meats, bread, and ale. Musicians played soft melodies, though the mood was more one of relief than revelry. Sansa circulated among the soldiers, thanking them personally. Some were northern men who had come south, others from the Reach or the Crownlands. Despite differences in origin, they had fought for the queen's cause. In each face she saw fatigue and the lingering echoes of battle. She offered them words of appreciation and promised them fair payment for their service. They looked at her with something akin to loyalty, perhaps even devotion. She was not an aloof monarch, but a woman who recognized their sacrifices. Brienne stood by a column, eyes scanning the crowd. When Sansa approached, the knight immediately straightened. Your Grace. Sansa grasped her hand, smiling. You did well, Ser Brienne. You have my gratitude. I know it was not an easy task. Brienne shook her head. It was necessary. But I'm glad it is done. Too many have died already in this realm. Sansa nodded. Yes. Too many. She glanced over at Tyrion, who was sharing a drink with a few soldiers. Their conversation seemed lighthearted, a rarity in these times. Sansa felt a surge of warmth for her hand. Though he had been born a Lannister, he stood unwaveringly at her side, helping to mend the damage his family had once done. She turned back to Brienne. Get some rest. You've earned it. Brienne smiled, a rare, genuine one, and bowed. Sansa watched her vanish into the mingling crowd of soldiers and courtiers. Then Sansa made her way to a quiet alcove, slipping past a tapestry. She needed a moment alone to gather her thoughts. Victory against the rebels was a triumph, but more challenges loomed. The Westerlands would need careful attention to prevent another uprising. The realm was not yet whole. She stared at a flickering candle set on a small table. The flame danced as if reminding her that even a small light can hold off the darkness. She closed her eyes, letting the swirl of voices recede into the distance. The hours wore on, and eventually the gathering concluded. Sansa retired to her chambers, physically and emotionally drained. She undid her braids, letting her hair fall around her shoulders. As she sank onto a cushioned chair, she found herself recalling her early days in King's Landing, back when she was a terrified girl in a gilded cage. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memory fueled her resolve. She had sworn she would never be powerless again. Over the following weeks, Sansa redoubled her efforts to rebuild. The presence of her triumphant soldiers in the streets of King's Landing was a reminder that, though she led with compassion, she would not hesitate to act against threats. Merchants from Braavos began to arrive, intrigued by the Queen's stable governance and hoping to open trade routes. The Reach's harvest started to improve with better distribution of seeds. New coinage featuring a dire wolf and a rose on one side and the seven-pointed star on the other entered circulation, symbolizing the unity Sansa hoped to foster. Dorne, ever aloof, sent cautious envoys, but at least they no longer spoke of secession. Sansa sensed that the realm was beginning to heal, slowly but surely. One autumn day, she stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep as a convoy from the Vale arrived. She spotted the banners of House Royce, House Corbray, and others who had once served Littlefinger's interests. Now they came to pay fealty to the new queen in the south. As Sansa welcomed them, she couldn't help but recall her Aunt Lisa, her cousin Robin, and the manipulations that had nearly cost her everything. But the men who dismounted from horses wore respectful expressions, offering gifts of silver and falcons. One lord even brought a cask of sweet iced wine from the heights of the Vale. Sansa received them graciously, knowing their support was crucial. That evening, the Vale lords joined her for a feast in the partially restored banquet hall. Tapestries from across the realm adorned the walls, showing scenes of heroic deeds and peaceful harvests. Sansa sat at the high table, flanked by Tyrion on one side and an open seat on the other. She had no king consort, and she had chosen not to fill the seat with another mere advisor. Conversation revolved around trade routes across the mountainous passes and the Vale's readiness to provide grain during the next winter. The lords were impressed with the calm that had fallen over King's Landing, though they still voiced concerns about banditry in the Riverlands. Sansa assured them that she was dispatching troops to handle the outlaws. Midway through the feast, as servants removed the plates of roasted venison and brought out spiced fruit tarts, Lord Royce stood to toast. He was a tall man with a booming voice and a stern demeanor. "Your Grace," he said, lifting his goblet, "we in the Vale have watched your rise with cautious hope. We do not forget that our late Lord Protector once guided you or thought to guide you. But we see you now forging your own path. We, the Lords of the Vale, wish to pledge our support to your reign. May the North and the South remain united in peace." Sansa inclined her head. "Thank you, Lord Royce. May we work together for the prosperity of all." She sipped her wine, feeling the burn of spices in her throat. The entire hall raised their cups, a wave of murmured blessings sweeping through the air. After the feast ended, Sansa returned to her solar, accompanied by Tyrion. They reviewed a stack of messages that had arrived during the banquet. Among them was a letter sealed with a direwolf stamp, news from her cousin in Winterfell again, praising her for quelling the Westerlands rebellion and tentatively suggesting that she send an envoy north to discuss further cooperation. Sansa read it with careful attention. She felt the stir of longing once more. King's Landing was her domain, but Winterfell was still her ancestral home. "Perhaps it is time for an official visit," she murmured, half to herself. Tyrion set aside his cup. "If you travel, you would leave me as regent in your absence. Are you certain you trust me with that responsibility?" Sansa met his gaze. "I do trust you, Tyrion. You've proven yourself. But I'd also leave Brienne and a portion of the guard here. King's Landing would remain safe in your hands. The question is whether the realm can afford my absence. Is it stable enough?" The two of them conferred late into the night, weighing the risks. Ultimately, they decided that a short journey might indeed strengthen her ties with the North. The city was calmer now, and the next phases of rebuilding were underway. Tyrion could handle administrative matters for a few weeks. It was time for Sansa to affirm her bonds with her homeland, to reassure them that she had not forgotten her roots. The next morning, word went out that the Queen planned a royal progress north. Preparations began at once. The lords in King's Landing were informed that the hand of the Queen would manage affairs. Sansa selected a small entourage, enough guards for safety but not an overwhelming retinue. Ser Brienne insisted on accompanying her. Tyrion remained behind, albeit with a slight reluctance, as he oversaw the capital. Within days, Sansa departed the city, riding through the gates at the head of a modest column. The small folk lined the streets, some waving farewell. Word of her mercy, her measured governance, and her personal visits to the war-torn districts had earned her a measure of goodwill. She felt humbled by their well-wishes, remembering how once they cheered for Joffrey with equal fervor. She promised herself she would never betray their trust as he had. They traveled along the King's Road, through the Crownlands and into the Riverlands. Along the way, Sansa observed the state of the fields and villages. The countryside was healing, some burned farms had been replanted, and new thatched roofs appeared atop cottages. Yet scars remained. Every now and then they passed a ruined tower or a scorched patch of land. But the people they encountered seemed determined to move forward. Sansa halted often to speak with villagers, receiving their concerns and offering gentle reassurances. At night, she and her companions rested in the keeps of minor lords who treated her with courtesy. Some were clearly awed by entertaining a queen in the south who bore the name Stark. Others observed her with cautious curiosity. As they pressed further north, the air grew cooler, the skies grayer. Finally, they crossed the neck, that narrow stretch of marshy land that separated the north from the south. Sansa felt a strange flutter in her chest. She was returning home, but no longer as the Lady of Winterfell. She came as queen in the south, a bridge between two worlds. She wondered how the northern lords and ladies would greet her. Would they resent her for taking a southern crown? Or would they see her as one of their own who had risen to power in a distant court? At Mo Cailin, they were greeted by loyal soldiers who had sworn to Bran's guidance. Sansa dismounted, recalling the fortress's bleak towers and the tales of how it had once been the key to defending the north. The garrison's captain bowed deeply, offering Sansa a meal and lodging. She accepted graciously. That night, she walked the ramparts, gazing out at the mist-shrouded swamps. Her breath clouded in the chilly air. She felt the north breathing around her, whispering old memories. She wondered if, in some way, it judged her. But she also remembered how she had yearned for Winterfell's safety when she was a frightened child trapped in the capital. Now, she had returned on her own terms. The next day, they continued north, the landscape gradually turning from marsh to forest, and then to the rolling hills near the last river. The traveling party made camp under towering pines, the nights cold enough to make them shiver despite their cloaks. Brienne remained ever vigilant, ensuring the queen's safety. At last, after a journey of nearly 3 weeks, they crested a ridge and beheld the site of Winterfell. Sansa's heart ached with familiarity. The stout walls, the watchtowers, the smoke drifting from the chimneys, the ancient castle that had endured for generations of Starks. As they approached the main gate, horns sounded a soft note of welcome. The gates swung open, and within the courtyard, a gathering of northern lords and retainers stood ready. Many wore furs and thick wool cloaks, their breath visible in the crisp air. Sansa dismounted, her legs stiff from the journey, and handed her reins to a stable boy who stared at her with wide eyes. Then she was greeted by her cousin, now recognized as the steward of Winterfell along with several familiar faces. She embraced her cousin, who smiled awkwardly. He was not used to formalities nor to being in charge of Winterfell, but he was doing his best. They exchanged a few words of welcome, and she noticed the subtle changes to the castle: new gates, repaired battlements. A sense of quiet pride swelled in her chest, seeing the north standing strong. Inside the great hall, fires blazed in hearths, and the smell of roasted meats made Sansa's stomach rumble. She realized she hadn't eaten properly in days. The northern lords and ladies greeted her formally, though some approached with genuine warmth. Lady Mormont's successor, another young but determined woman, offered a curtsy and fierce loyalty. Lord Glover, who had once turned away from the Starks, now bowed solemnly. And so on, a procession of northern names and faces. Sansa greeted each in turn, her demeanor poised yet cordial. She sensed some curiosity about her southern crown, but no open hostility. Finally, she was shown to a chamber near the lord's quarters, a place of honor, though not the main lord's bedchamber. Her cousin occupied that as the current lord of Winterfell. She set down her belongings, gazing around at the thick tapestries and the sturdy wooden furniture. A swirl of memories danced at the edge of her mind. Herself as a child, reading songs by a fire, her mother sewing at a table, Arya chasing a cat across the floor. The ghosts of her past were everywhere. Yet she was no longer a girl. She was a queen with responsibilities that stretched well beyond these walls. That evening, the castle hosted a welcoming feast in her honor. Long tables were laid out with trenchers of bread, platters of roasted boar, stews of onion and mutton, and pitchers of ale and mulled wine. Northern music filled the hall, a robust sound of pipes and drums. Sansa sat at the high table beside her cousin, with Brienne standing guard. She felt the warmth of the hearth fire on her face, and for a moment she let herself relax. The conversation flowed around her, talk of harvests, new alliances, and stories of the realm's slow recovery from war. Once or twice she caught a lord's eyes flicking to her crown, which she had chosen to wear in the north out of respect for her position. But no one challenged her. She recognized that as a sign of the times, once the north might have bristled at the idea of a southern crown on a Stark's head. Now they saw her as a stabilizing force. So long as she honored the north's independence under her cousin, they seemed content. Some time after the main courses were cleared, she rose and raised a goblet of dark northern ale. "My lords, my ladies," she began, her voice carrying through the hall. "I am beyond grateful for this homecoming, for the kindness you have shown me. Though I hold the throne in the south, I have never forgotten that I am a Stark of Winterfell. This castle is in my blood and the north remains in my heart." She paused, letting her eyes sweep over the faces in the hall. "I come not as a ruler seeking tribute, but as a daughter returning to her family. I ask that we stand united in peace, north and south, so that our children and theirs may never again know the horrors of war." Applause and cheers echoed in the hall. The northern lords thumped their cups on the tables and the ladies clapped their hands. Sansa felt a flicker of genuine joy. For once, she was among her people, not an outsider forced to keep smiling through a court of hidden knives. She resumed her seat, accepting the well-wishes that came her way and exchanging toasts with lords who approached the high table. As the evening wore on, she recalled simpler times, though she knew she could never truly go back. When the feast ended, the hall gradually emptied, leaving only a few stragglers talking in low voices near the dying hearth. Sansa excused herself and made her way to the godwood. The night was cold, the sky scattered with shimmering stars. She pulled her fur cloak tighter around her shoulders. The snow crunched under her boots as she walked the familiar path. Finally, she stood beneath the ancient weirwood, its bark white as bone, its leaves crimson like blood. A gentle breeze stirred the branches, sending a soft rustling through the air. She bowed her head, offering silent prayer to the old gods, though she was not as devout as her brother Bran or sister Arya might have been. Still, the old gods had guided the Starks for generations, and she felt a sense of connection here that she could never feel in the Septs of the South. The weirwood's carved face seemed to watch her, its expression solemn. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of pine and snow. A voice murmured from behind. "You've returned." Sansa turned to see her cousin, now Lord Stark, stepping into the clearing. He was a quiet boy grown into a more composed young man. He offered her a respectful nod. "I didn't mean to intrude, cousin." Sansa shook her head. "Not at all. I'm glad to see you." They stood side by side beneath the old tree, breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. He spoke of how the North was faring, how some of the houses had needed coaxing to accept a new Lord Stark, but how he maintained the principle of independence that Sansa herself had advocated. He asked about her life in the South, about the intrigues, the responsibilities. She told him enough to convey the weight of her burdens without recounting every tragedy. In turn, he admitted he sometimes doubted his own leadership. Winterfell was steeped in the legacy of great Starks. He feared he would not measure up. Sansa touched his arm gently. "I know what it is to doubt yourself, but you have the North's best interests at heart. You're not alone in this. We stand together as a family." He smiled, relief flickering in his eyes. They remained a while longer in the godwood, letting the hush of night envelop them. At length, Sansa returned to the warmth of the castle, her mind already churning with ideas on how to strengthen trade between the North and South, how to foster unity without undermining Northern independence. The path ahead would be delicate, but she felt renewed determination. Days slipped by in a comforting routine. She met with Northern lords, inspected Winterfell's stables, and dined with her cousin. Yet the South called to her. Reports continued to arrive from Tyrion. Updates on reconstruction, negotiations with foreign merchants, and the watchful management of any lingering tensions. Sansa had come north to affirm her bonds, and she had done so. Now, with winter's chill creeping in and rumors of early snows on the way, it was time for her to return to King's Landing. She made her farewells with genuine sadness, promising to visit again. The people of the North, seeing her devotion, seemed more at ease with her southern crown. In truth, she had become a bridge between two realms, an emblem of what might be possible if old grudges could be set aside. As her party departed Winterfell, riding south along the King's Road, she glanced back at the castle walls one last time. Snow swirled gently, dusting the battlements. In that moment, she realized she no longer felt as if she were leaving a part of herself behind. Winterfell remained a part of her, just as her place in the South was now entrenched. She had grown into her role, a queen who was both wolf and rose, forged by trials and tempered by compassion. The journey back to King's Landing took another few weeks, uneventful save for a couple of autumn storms. When Sansa finally beheld the capital's distant towers, she felt a curious mix of relief and renewed determination. This city was not her childhood dream, but it was her chosen responsibility. She entered through the main gate, greeted by guards and small folk who once again lined the streets. Their cheers, if more subdued than a grand triumph, still warmed her. She waved, offering a gentle smile. She wondered if, over time, their cynicism might erode, replaced by genuine trust in her reign. In the Red Keep, Tyrion greeted her with a flourish, bowing dramatically. "Your grace returns to us at last. The city has not burned down, though it tried in spirit once or twice." Sansa laughed lightly, a sound that carried relief. "I'm glad to see it still stands. Thank you for keeping watch in my absence." He winked. "You left me enough to do. But I have matters that require your final say, documents to sign, a shipment from Dorne to approve, a trade alliance with a Pentoshi merchant to negotiate. And, of course, court petitions have piled up." He motioned to a stack of parchment. Sansa eyed it with stoic acceptance. They went at once to her solar, where Sansa shed her traveling cloak and settled into a chair. She listened as Tyrion laid out the pressing issues. Though part of her longed for a day's rest, she knew a queen's duty never truly paused. She took up her quill, skimming the documents, signing where needed, offering corrections on terms that seemed unfair. By the time dusk fell, she had made some headway. The capital's daily business resumed around her. At supper, in a smaller chamber where only a handful of trusted advisors gathered, Sansa learned of how the city had fared in her absence. Some minor squabbles had arisen, quickly quelled by Tyrion's interventions. The repairs to the city wall progressed smoothly. New alliances with the Vale and the North had already improved trade routes. And though rumors of further Lannister loyalists circulated, there had been no sign of open revolt. In short, Sansa's rule showed stability. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a cautious optimism. That night, she stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. Lanterns glowed in windows, and the moonlight reflected off the Blackwater Bay. She thought of all she had endured. The timid girl who came south to marry a prince, the desperate captive who lost her family, the survivor who learned hard lessons in cunning and resilience. Now she was queen, not of the North, her brother's realm, but of the South, a realm hungry for peace and prosperity. She knew the crown she wore was heavy with expectations, that her every decision would be scrutinized. But she stood as living proof that the darkest trials need not snuff out hope. She would serve, protect, and guide this realm with all the wisdom she had gained. In the hush of the evening, Sansa whispered a quiet vow. "I am Sansa Stark. I am queen in the South, and I will not fail them." The wind carried her words into the sprawling city below, where, perhaps, they might become another whispered promise of a better future. Sansa woke at dawn, drawn from her dreams by the low murmur of the city's early stirrings. The vast sprawl of King's Landing greeted her through the window, the towers caught in the pale hush of first light. Though she'd returned only days ago, it felt longer. Duty had a way of consuming time. She dressed in a simple gown of gray wool trimmed with silver thread, then fixed her hair into a modest coil at the nape of her neck. She decided against the crown so early in the day there would be time enough to bear its weight. Once ready, she left her chambers, passing Brienne by the threshold. The tall knight gave a deferential nod but fell into step beside her. The new day began as all days here did, rife with the demands of a city that refused to sleep. They descended a winding corridor lit by torches guttering in the morning gloom. Servants curtsied or offered bows as the queen passed, though Sansa often encouraged them not to stand on such ceremony. She had learned long ago that while a certain level of formality ensured respect, it was good to let people see she was not unreachable. Of all the lessons King's Landing had taught her, its intrigues, its betrayals, she still believed courtesy and empathy were strengths, not weaknesses. Her first destination was the Red Keep's great yard, where a training ground had been set up for the city guard. The yard was lined with straw dummies, weapon racks, and a wide open space for drilling. Sansa wanted to see the improvements that had been ordered in her absence. She found Captain Ulf, a grizzled man with a scar across his chin, barking orders at a line of fresh recruits. At the sight of the queen, he bowed awkwardly, then ushered her to where the newest armor sets were stacked. Sleek but practical plate for the guardsmen who patrolled the city's perimeter. Sansa ran her hand across the cool steel, nodding her approval. It was a far cry from the battered gear she remembered seeing when she first took the throne. Progress. Small steps toward a cohesive defense. She asked the captain about morale, about the readiness of the guards to protect the city from cutpurses or riots or worse. He responded with a mix of pride and caution. They were better prepared than before, but always in need of more training, better rations, newer recruits. Sansa promised to allocate additional funds if the treasury allowed. They both knew money was in high demand everywhere, but she would see what could be done. From there, she moved to the open courtyard where the small folk were often permitted to gather when they brought petitions, though official court sessions took place inside. A few dozen souls had already arrived, well before the formal hearing. They waited anxiously in a makeshift queue, hoping to catch the queen's attention. Seeing them, Sansa decided on an impromptu audience. She and Brienne walked among them, stopping now and then to listen. One woman clutched a bundle of cloth that turned out to be her infant daughter, who was ill. She begged for any assistance to pay a local healer. Another man, a carpenter, asked for compensation for a job completed on the city's walls, claiming the foreman refused to pay him the agreed coin. A teenaged boy explained, stammering, that his father had died in the war and left no farmland, so they were living hand-to-mouth in the ruins of Flea Bottom. Sansa listened with grave attention to each, offering what immediate help she could. A letter of command to see the child's healer reimbursed, a note to the carpenter's foreman threatening legal action if he refused to pay wages, and a directive to the city bailiff regarding the boy's plight. She gave him permission to approach the stables about an apprenticeship, trusting the stable master to find some way to make use of a keen youth. She wished she could do more than issue orders, but at least it was something. At least she was not ignoring them. Tyrion was waiting in the throne room by the time she arrived. He stood conversing with a pair of envoys from the Stormlands, his posture patient but slightly tense, as if he'd been enduring a disagreement. The moment Sansa entered, the envoys fell silent, offered low bows, and looked up at her expectantly. Tyrion took a breath. "Your Grace," he said, "I was just explaining to our friends here that refortifying the Stormlands coastal keeps must proceed at a sustainable pace so as not to outstrip the realm's overall resources." The older envoy, a wiry man with streaks of gray in his beard, stepped forward. "Your Grace, we understand the need for caution, but our coastline remains vulnerable to raiders from the sea. We lost many men in the wars and have fewer ships to patrol. We implore you to let us proceed with greater speed. The Stormlands are your shield on the eastern coast." Sansa had heard the argument before. Each region insisted it needed the lion's share of resources to rebuild. The Westerlands demanded funds to rebuild Lannisport's trade, the Reach needed seeds, the Crownlands needed repairs, and so on. She perched on the new steel throne, letting the envoy's words sink in. The throne felt neither comfortable nor threatening, just a simple seat of hammered metal that reminded her each day power was a burden, not an indulgence. "I understand your position," she said. "You've faced repeated raids by pirates or opportunistic sell sales. However, I must balance your needs with those of the other provinces. The Iron Bank of Bravos grants us some loans, but they come with conditions I will not blindly accept. If we overextend ourselves in the Stormlands alone, we risk weakening the realm's overall stability. I suggest a staggered plan. Complete the urgent fortifications along the most frequently raided stretches and wait on the more distant keeps until the treasury recovers. I give you my word this matter is a priority, but I cannot promise immediate completion of every project." Her tone was calm but firm. Once she might have lacked the confidence to refuse or delay a lord's request, fearful of political repercussions. Now she had learned that saying yes to everyone was impossible. A queen had to choose. The envoys exchanged glances. One nodded grudgingly. "We appreciate your honesty, Your Grace. We only hope the raids do not grow bolder while we wait." Sansa inclined her head. "We'll send additional patrol ships out of Blackwater Bay for now. If you have any skilled sailors who can assist, they'll be provided ships to bolster your maritime watch. We'll do what we must to deter threats until your keeps are fortified." That seemed to mollify them. They bowed again and departed, leaving Tyrion to grin up at her in mild relief. "You handled that adeptly, as always. I was about to resort to threats of withholding barley shipments if they didn't calm themselves." Sansa gave him a slight smile. "Thank you, Lord Hand, but we'll save the barley threats for a more stubborn audience." She rose from the throne, stepping down the dais to join him. Courtiers lingered, as always, but none approached her with immediate demands. The official court session was scheduled for later in the day. They exited the throne room together, Brienne following at a discreet distance. Tyrion offered Sansa his arm in a gentle gesture of courtly politeness, guiding her toward a smaller side passage that led to a newly refurbished council chamber. Within, a cluster of her closest advisors waited: Maester Baldric, a learned man from Old Town; Lady Phalia of the Crownlands, whom Sansa had elevated to Master of Laws; and Ser Keelan, a knight who served as Master of Coin after demonstrating an uncanny knack for balancing funds. They all bowed as she and Tyrion entered, then took their seats around a circular table. A window high in the wall let in a stripe of sunshine that fell across the spread of maps and parchments. Sansa settled in, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Let us hear the day's business," she said, and Maester Baldric began at once, adjusting the chain around his neck that signified his many areas of study. "Your Grace, we've had word from the Free City of Pentos regarding the trade agreement you sought. They find our proposed tariff rates too high. They are threatening to take their shipping business to Lannisport or Old Town instead, where they claim they can secure better terms. I suspect they're testing your willingness to negotiate." Tyrion chimed in. "Pentos thrives on negotiation by brinksmanship. They posture, threaten to pull out, then hope we'll lower the tariffs. If we call their bluff, we might gain more favorable terms. If they're serious, though, we risk losing their trade entirely." Sansa thought quietly for a moment. Pentos is a valuable partner, but not irreplaceable. Braavos remains an option, and Volantis has also sent feelers regarding expanded trade. If Pentos truly walks away, they may return soon enough when they see we have routes to the Reach and Dorne that can move goods swiftly inland. Let's hold firm on the tariff. But we can add a minor concession, a reduced docking fee for their first few shipments. That might be enough to keep them at the table without gutting our revenue." Maester Baldric nodded, making a note. Ser Keelan tapped a finger on the table. "We must ensure that any reduction in docking fees is temporary. We can't be seen as pushovers." "Agreed," Sansa said, a hint of steel in her voice. "Make it clear this is a grace period, no more than 1 year. After that, standard fees apply." She glanced at Tyrion. "You'll oversee the negotiations?" "With pleasure," Tyrion replied, already drafting some language in his mind. Once, Sansa had resented his cunning, now it was one of her greatest assets. Next, Lady Phalia spoke. She was a tall woman with angular features and a direct manner of speech. "Your Grace, I've compiled the results of our inquiry into corruption within the city guard ranks. 2 captains stand accused of extorting merchants for protection fees. Testimonies from small folk suggest a pattern of intimidation. I recommend a formal trial. If they're found guilty, we must make an example. Otherwise, the guard's integrity is at risk." Sansa's jaw tightened. "A trial, certainly. That's the proper course. I will not tolerate guards who prey on the very people they're sworn to protect. Assemble a panel of 3 judges, yourself, Master Ulf, and 1 neutral party from the faith. The guard must see we are impartial but firm." Lady Phalia bowed her head. "As you command, Your Grace. We'll proceed swiftly." One by one, the council members raised their topics: the progress of farmland irrigation around the Blackwater, a shortage of stonemasons in the city, the continuing flow of refugees from conflict-torn corners of the realm, though that flow had slowed. With each matter, Sansa listened closely, weighed options, and set a course. These council sessions were her favorite and least favorite part of ruling. Favorite because they were the engine of real change. Least favorite because every decision carried a possible consequence she might not foresee. At midday, the meeting concluded. Tyrion stretched, rubbing his neck. "I believe I'll find some lunch before the next crisis arises." Sansa smiled, intending to do the same. But just as she rose, a young squire peered around the doorway, face flushed from running. "Your Grace," the boy panted. "There's a messenger at the gates." He arrived with a black banner bearing a dragon's skull. Sansa felt a chill at the phrase. A black banner bearing a dragon's skull? It sounded like some echo of the Targaryen legacy, or perhaps some new pretender. She collected herself. "Show him to the receiving hall. I'll speak with him at once." Brienne's expression hardened with alert. Tyrion stopped in mid-step, curiosity sparking in his eyes. Together, they made their way to a smaller hall near the gates of the Red Keep, one used for less ceremonial receptions. The squire led them inside, where a lean man in travel-worn attire waited. He wore a cloak of black cloth emblazoned with a dragon's skull in silver thread, though the craftsmanship was rough. He knelt immediately. "Your Grace," he said, voice hoarse from what might have been days on the road. "I bring tidings from beyond the narrow sea. My master requests your ear." Sansa approached, noticing the lines of exhaustion on his face. "Rise. You are in the presence of Queen Sansa Stark. Speak plainly. Who is your master, and what does that sigil mean?" He stood, swallowing nervously. My master is a descendant of House Blackfire, or so he claims, a line thought extinct, but he insists otherwise. He has formed a company of sellswords and loyalists across the sea. The Black Dragon was once their sigil, though it is said to be a twisted branch of House Targaryen. He calls himself Igor Rivers II, taking the name of a legendary figure from the Blackfire rebellions. My master says he has come to claim what is his by right, the Iron Throne. Sansa stiffened, though the Iron Throne itself was gone, replaced by her simpler seat. Still, the notion of a Targaryen Blackfire pretender was unsettling. She could almost feel the old ghosts stirring. And you come here, as what, exactly? A herald declaring war. The messenger's eyes flicked about nervously. My master hopes to avoid war, your grace. He proposes a parley, a meeting to discuss a solution that spares the realm more blood. He claims many in Essos believe the Dragon Banner still holds power in Westeros. He invites you to treat with him. Tyrion let out a low whistle. A Blackfire pretender. They never truly go away, do they? He gave Sansa a meaningful glance. In the centuries before the Targaryen line fell, the Blackfires were legitimized bastards of House Targaryen who twice attempted to claim the throne, igniting rebellions that spilled rivers of blood. Most believed them extinguished, but rumors persisted. Sansa's mind raced. If this man was merely another pretender with no real force, ignoring him might be best. But if he had the backing of sellswords or foreign powers, he could stir chaos. The realm was still too fragile for another war. She exhaled and spoke carefully. Tell your master I will consider his request. If he means to come to Westeros in peace, he should land his forces in a neutral port, perhaps in the Stormlands or the Vale, and submit to our inspection. Only then might I entertain an audience. I will not risk repeating the horrors of past Targaryen envy. Asians. The messenger bowed deeply. Thank you, your grace. I'll deliver your words at once. He hesitated. My master also bade me offer you a letter. He reached into his satchel and withdrew a parchment, sealed with black wax. Sansa nodded for him to present it to Tyrion, who took it gingerly. We will read it, Sansa said, and gestured for guards to escort the messenger to a guest chamber, ensuring he was given food and rest. She and Tyrion then retreated to a more private corner of the hall, Brienne standing guard. Tyrion broke the seal, unfolding the parchment. His expression shifted with each line, mild incredulity painted on his face. Well? Sansa asked. He styles himself Igor of the House Blackfire, Blood of the Dragon, and so forth, Tyrion said, scanning. He offers to marry you, uniting the blood of the wolf and the dragon. He claims it would bring stability to the realm and quell the lingering Targaryen loyalists. In return, he wants recognition of his lineage as co-ruler, or perhaps as your consort. He frames it all as if it were a benevolent proposition, saving Westeros from further strife. Sansa stared at him, a tumult of anger, shock, and strange amusement roiling inside. Marry me? She snatched the parchment, reading the lines for herself. The language was florid, describing the lost grandeur of House Targaryen, the rightful heir narrative. Then came the proposal, a marriage alliance that would blend the northern virtue with the dragon's flame. The final lines contained a veiled warning that refusal might provoke a conflict no one wanted. When she finished, Sansa handed the letter back, unsettled. This is audacious. Tyrion pursed his lips. Indeed, though not without cunning. He tries to position you as the path to legitimacy for his claim. But one wonders if he truly expects you to bend so easily. Or perhaps he hopes to sow dissent by claiming you refused a peaceful path. Brienne, silent until now, spoke in a firm voice. Your grace, this man's claim is tenuous at best. We have no evidence he even descends from House Blackfire aside from his word. It's likely a ploy. Sansa nodded. I agree it's likely a ploy, but a dangerous one. If he's clever, he might attract old Targaryen sympathizers or those discontent with my rule. Even the rumor of dragons, however false, can stir the hearts of the desperate. He must know that. She mulled it over. If we ignore him, he might set sail with his company and try to land by force. But accepting his marriage proposal is out of the question. I won't yoke the realm to some pretender. Tyrion tapped the parchment. We could respond with a conditional acceptance of parley, insist he present proof of his lineage, dismantle the majority of his armed followers, and come to the capital with only a small escort. If he refuses, that reveals his bad faith. If he agrees, we have him where we can negotiate on our terms. Sansa weighed the idea. Yes, we'll do that. Let it be known we'll not turn away from diplomacy, but we won't welcome an armed host landing on our shores. Draft the response carefully. Stress that I am queen by the will of the lords of Westeros, and if he truly wants peace, he must abide by our conditions. Tyrion dipped his head. As you wish, your grace. I'll pen the letter. In the meantime, we might prepare for the possibility of a confrontation. If he does have a sizable force, we'll need to bolster our naval defenses. Brienne nodded. I'll see to the readiness of our ships. We still have the ships from the Vale and some from the Reach's coasts. Sansa closed her eyes briefly, summoning the composure she'd honed. Let's proceed then. The last thing this realm needs is another war. But if war is forced upon us, we must be prepared. They parted ways, Tyrion heading toward his solar to craft the official response, Brienne off to consult the Master-at-Arms about mustering ships, and Sansa to her own duties. All the while, the specter of another Targaryen pretender weighed on her mind. She remembered the utter devastation wrought by Daenerys Stormborn when that queen's illusions of justice gave way to fire and blood. House Blackfyre was a different name, but it carried the same potent symbol, a black dragon, a claim of Targaryen blood, a swirl of romantic myth that might seduce the foolish or the angry. Sansa had to ensure the realm's fledgling stability did not crumble at the mere rumor of a returning dragon. By late afternoon, the official open court convened. Lords, merchants, and emissaries gathered in the throne room, a steady stream of supplicants presenting their petitions. Sansa judged disputes between shipping guilds, heard pleas from farmers demanding tax relief, and even mediated a quarrel between two minor lords over a contested parcel of land near the Rose Road. Each case required measured fairness. She had grown adept at reading the flickers of ambition or desperation in their eyes. It reminded her of her father's calm approach to justice back in Winterfell's Great Hall, though he'd seldom faced the labyrinthine complexities of King's Landing. As court wore on, the weight of the day began to press upon her. Thoughts of the so-called Igor Blackfyre intruded. She could almost see Peter Baelish's smirk from the past, whispering that chaos was a ladder. In truth, it was a pit into which people were pushed by the ambitions of a few. It would not happen again, not if she could help it. Finally, as dusk began to fall, the day's petitions concluded. She left the throne room, leaning on Brienne's silent strength. Servants lit the corridors with torches, and the wind from the sea carried a briny chill. In her solar, she found Tyrion had left the draft of the letter for her review. She read it carefully, nodding at his balanced tone. He had indeed demanded proof of lineage, acceptance of certain restrictions, and a willingness to set aside most of this pretender's Sells-word company if he wished to meet. She added a small note in her own hand, clarifying that any threat to the realm's peace would be met with resolve. Then she sealed it with the dire wolf rose sigil of her reign. Tomorrow, the messenger from the Black Banner would carry it back to Essos. That night, Sansa dined lightly, too preoccupied to enjoy the roast pheasant placed before her. She found she missed the simpler fare of the north, where a stew and warm bread were enough after a hard day. This southern feast, with its spices and sauces, felt almost decadent in comparison. She managed polite conversation with the few courtiers at her table, skillfully deflecting their questions about the messenger's arrival. Word had already spread that a black dragon banner had arrived at court, and rumors traveled fast. Some whispered that a new Targaryen had emerged. Others feared a war of dragons and wolves. Sansa offered no details, refusing to stoke the gossip. After dinner, she retreated to her chamber. A cold wind rattled the shutters, and she found herself lighting an extra lamp against the creeping shadows. She shed her formal gown, dressing in a simpler robe. Moments later, a discreet knock drew her attention. Enter, she called, and Tyrion stepped inside, looking slightly disheveled as if he, too, had been wrestling with the day's burdens. I apologize for disturbing you, he said, bowing. But I thought you might like an update. The letter is being carried by the messenger tonight. He'll depart on the tide at dawn. Thank you, Sansa replied, her voice quiet. Did he mention when we might receive an answer? Likely within a few weeks, assuming the seas are favorable. I doubt we'll hear anything sooner. In the meantime, we should be vigilant. I've already alerted some of my connections in Essos to glean more intelligence. We need to know the size of the so-called Blackfyre's forces and whether he actually commands any dragons. He gave a rueful smile. Real dragons died with Daenerys, but one can never be entirely certain of the secrets that survive. Sansa nodded. Good. And thank you for all of it, truly. Sometimes I feel as though I can't blink without new threats materializing. Tyrion managed a small laugh. That's the nature of the game, I'm afraid. But you play it exceptionally well. I once told you we'd never forget you're the one who outlived them all. And indeed, here you stand. She cast her gaze downward, thinking of the many who had not survived, her father, mother, brothers. Even her sister Arya, though alive somewhere in the world, was lost to her, wandering distant lands. Sansa sometimes wondered if she'd ever return. Yes, she murmured. I stand. The cost was high. They said their goodnights and Tyrion departed. Alone with her thoughts, Sansa tried to summon the calm she needed for rest. The candle on her bedside table flickered, drawing shapes of dancing shadows on the stone wall. She remembered a time when darkness scared her, when she would lie awake fearful of the horrors that lurked in a place like King's Landing. Now she was the authority in these halls, she was the one people feared to cross. Yet fear had not vanished from her life. It had merely changed shape. She lay down, pulling the covers over her, listening to the faint thrum of the city outside. Slowly she drifted into a half-haunted sleep. In the following weeks, life in King's Landing pressed on. Sansa busied herself with the work of governance, ensuring the city's continued recovery. New roads were laid, the final scaffolding around the Great September came down, and the harbor expanded its docks to accommodate renewed trade. She mandated new laws aimed at preventing the hoarding of grain, imposing penalties on those who sought to exploit shortages. Word reached her that the Vale was enjoying a peaceful harvest and that the Riverlands were seeing a decline in outlaw raids after her policies placed bounties on bandit leaders. Each success buoyed her spirits, yet the specter of the Blackfire threat lurked at the back of her mind. At last, a raven arrived from a contact of Tyrion's in Braavos. Its contents confirmed that Igor Blackfire II, truly just a man named Marance, rumored to be the baseborn son of a merchant who had once claimed ties to a lost Targaryen bastard, was indeed assembling a small army. They called themselves the Golden Flame, a splinter group that had broken off from the more established Golden Company. Sansa recalled that the Golden Company had a storied history of supporting Blackfire claims, though the current leadership was more pragmatic. These Golden Flame sellswords, however, were hungry for a cause that might pay well if they seized any portion of Westeros. The letter mentioned perhaps 2,000 men, lightly equipped but battle-hardened, drilling near the coast of Essos. A few disenchanted lords from Westeros, refugees from the Targaryen downfall, had joined them. They had no dragons, no evidence of real Targaryen blood aside from their leader's claim, but they did have ambition, and that, Sansa knew, could be enough to spark chaos. She and Tyrion debated how to handle it. Some on her council argued for a preemptive strike, sending ships and men to crush this threat before it even set foot on Westerosi soil. Others urged caution, fearing that might provoke a larger conflict with Essosi powers or drive the sellswords to ally with more dangerous factions. Sansa considered each option with care. In the end, she decided to wait for the pretender's response to her terms. If he attempts to land without honoring my conditions, she said, we'll treat him as an invader. If he somehow agrees, we'll see if there's any room for a bloodless resolution. She had no illusions of forging an actual alliance with him. But if he was cunning enough to realize war would be his ruin, perhaps he'd come to the capital for parley, at which point she could discredit him or detain him altogether. It was a risky strategy, but so was every other. During this tense wait, Sansa maintained her outward composure, focusing on the realm's many tasks. One morning, she found herself in the castle gardens, a once devastated plot she had insisted on restoring. Rows of herbs, vegetables, and flowers grew behind the protective walls. Gardeners bustled about, trimming, watering, and harvesting. The sound of birds offered a rare sense of peace. Sansa often came here to clear her mind before beginning the day's official duties. She liked the scent of damp earth in the morning, the sight of green shoots pushing through soil that had once been scorched by dragonfire. Perhaps it was a metaphor for the realm itself, renewal out of ashes. A flash of blue fabric caught her eye. Marjorie Tyrell had once worn a gown of that same vibrant shade, someone else who once walked these paths, now gone. The memories of the past felt both near and distant. Sansa paused by a bush of pale roses, remembering the nights Marjorie had tried to be a friend to her, how fleeting that friendship had been in the churn of politics. She touched a blossom, inhaling the fragrance. Soft footsteps approached. It was Brienne, who remained ever vigilant. "Your Grace," she said gently. "The new Master of Whispers requests an audience." Sansa turned. She had named a Master of Whispers some months ago, a quiet, unobtrusive woman named Lana who had proven adept at gathering intelligence among merchants, sailors, and the lesser lords. Sansa wondered if there was fresh news of Blackfire or some other threat. She nodded. "Let's see her." Brienne led her to a small enclosed pavilion where Lana waited, hood drawn, a nervous set to her shoulders. She offered a deep bow. Sansa gestured for her to rise. "What have you learned?" Lana's gaze darted to Brienne, then back to Sansa. Her voice was low and measured. "Whispers from the Westerlands, Your Grace. Some of the minor Lannister bannermen who remain resentful have been in communication with the Golden Flame. They are sending letters overseas, expressing interest in supporting a Blackfire restoration if it means ousting the Starks from the south. I don't have names yet, but my sources suggest at least 2 houses near the crag might be involved." Sansa's frustration flared. Though she'd quelled the rebellion in the Westerlands months ago, pockets of discontent obviously lingered. "Continue your inquiries," she said. "I want names. When we have proof, we'll act. We can't allow traitors to open a foothold for an invader." Lana bowed and withdrew as swiftly as she'd come. Sansa stood in the pavilion for a moment, hands clenching at her sides. The rose fragrance lingered, incongruous with the news. She cast a glance at Brienne, who kept her face stoic but her eyes troubled. Later that day, she convened another council session. This time, the mood was heavier than usual, overshadowed by the possibility of an internal faction conspiring with the Blackfire pretender. Tyrion and Lady Phalia joined the discussion along with Ser Keelan, who had begun discreetly tracing financial transactions that might link certain Westerlands houses to suspect dealings. As they pored over ledgers and scrolls, Sansa felt a grim sense of resolve. She would not let these lords stir a new civil war. Tyrion tapped a finger on a ledger. "Here's something. House Estrin, lesser vassals near the crag, made a substantial purchase of arms. They claim it's for protection against outlaws, but the timing is suspicious. Plus, they've been sending frequent correspondence to ports that lead to Essos." Lady Phalia frowned. "If we confront them without solid proof, they'll cry innocence. But letting them plot unchecked is dangerous." Sansa rested her forearms on the table. "We'll send an agent to infiltrate their household, gather incontrovertible evidence. In the meantime, place watchers on their movements. If they make any open calls for men-at-arms, we'll react." Brienne nodded. "I'll dispatch some of our best scouts." Quietly. So it went day after day, a dance of vigilance and caution. Sansa's nights became restless, her dreams haunted by looming shapes of dragons overhead or by echoes of her family's tragedy. Yet each morning she rose with renewed determination. She had once been a frightened girl, powerless before sadistic princes and cunning manipulators. She was no longer that girl. Word finally arrived in the form of a raven from the Golden Flame. The messenger brought a sealed letter marked with that same black skull sigil. Sansa read it in the council chamber, her advisors gathered around. The text was elaborate, using lofty phrases, but the gist was clear. Igor Blackfire II refused to disband his cell's words prior to a meeting, insisting it would leave him vulnerable. However, he proposed a compromise. He would land with only half his forces, leaving the rest in Essos if Sansa agreed to meet him in Storm's End, neutral ground by his reckoning. Under the oath of guest right, a hush fell over the table. Tyrion arched a brow. Half his forces could still be 1,000 men. That's hardly neutral. Lady Phalia let out a derisive snort. He wants you to come to him in the Stormlands, effectively surrounded by his company. That's not a parley, that's a trap. Sansa reread the letter, her mind parsing each rhetorical flourish for hidden meaning. The cunning was obvious. If she refused, he could claim she was unwilling to negotiate for peace. If she agreed and traveled to Storm's End, she'd be at a disadvantage. Storm's End belongs to the Baratheon line, but they're all but gone. The crown has loosely administered it, but we never fully replaced the old Baratheons. He must believe it's effectively up for grabs. If we gather a large enough force to match him, we risk open conflict. If we go without enough men, we risk being overrun. Brienne spoke gravely. We could propose a different location. Perhaps a smaller keep by the Rose Road or in the Crownlands, where we can control the environment. Tyrion shrugged. He may reject that outright. He's trying to create the impression of meeting us on equal footing, which of course is nonsense. He's no king. But we must consider how the realm perceives this. If you appear unwilling to parley, certain lords might be swayed by his propaganda that you refuse peace. Sansa pressed her fingertips to her temple, feeling a slight ache. What if we accept his chosen site but insist we bring a force equal in size? And we demand that Storm's End remain under the watch of a neutral party, say, knights sworn to the faith, while we talk inside. That way, neither side can claim the other is stacking the deck. Brienne eyed her carefully. It's still risky, but perhaps less so. Tyrion nodded slowly. It might be the best compromise we can extract. If he truly wants a parley, he'll accept. If he refuses, we have further proof he seeks war. Sansa exhaled. Then that is our counterproposal. Draft the letter, Tyrion. Be gracious but firm. I will meet him in Storm's End, but only if the Faith militant or a similarly neutral contingent monitors the gates. Both sides bring an equal number of men. If he values peace, that should be acceptable. The council agreed on this course, though a sense of dread clung to the discussion. A parley with a Sellsword pretender carried extraordinary risk. They sent the Raven that afternoon, and Sansa found herself praying. She was never sure whether to pray to the old gods or the Seven that the man would see reason. Another war would bleed the realm dry. While they waited for his response, Sansa resumed her duties, her outward demeanor unruffled. Inside, her heart hammered at the thought of traveling to Storm's End for a face-to-face meeting with a claimant who invoked the memory of Targaryen wars. She tried to distract herself with the daily routine, meeting petitioners, overseeing the city watch, consulting with the master of coin about budgets, ensuring the flow of supplies from the Reach. But at night, she found herself restless in her bed, the corners of her mind conjuring every possible disastrous scenario at Storm's End. She had to remind herself that she had come through worse. The scars from Joffrey and Ramsay had taught her what it meant to face cruelty and survive. If the so-called Blackfire thought he could break her spirit, he would find a different woman than those old tormentors had encountered. When the Raven came bearing the pretender's acceptance of her conditions, Sansa felt a swirl of relief and anxiety. The letter was brief. He agreed to meet at Storm's End in 2 fortnights. Each side would bring 100 armed men, no more. The fortress itself would be temporarily under the watch of 10 Faith militant knights to ensure no sabotage. He requested that Sansa come in person. No substitutes. She read it aloud to Tyrion, Brienne, and her other close advisors. The group exchanged glances. Well, Tyrion said finally. It seems the stage is set. Sansa nodded. We'll proceed. Ser Brienne, you'll command the guard I bring. Tyrion, you'll come as my hand. We'll keep our 100 men close. If anything seems amiss, we'll leave at once. Preparations began in earnest. Word spread that the Queen would travel to Storm's End for a diplomatic summit, spurring rumors and gossip throughout the capital. Some believed Sansa was about to seal a marriage alliance with the new Targaryen pretender. Others feared she would be assassinated. Still others admired her courage in confronting him. Sansa paid no mind to the rumors but stayed focused on ensuring she had the right balance of defense and diplomacy. On the chosen morning, she stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep wearing a deep blue riding cloak embroidered with silver dire wolves and golden roses, her hair pinned up and fastened with a small net of silver. She had chosen not to wear her crown for the journey, thinking it best to avoid the added burden on the road. Instead, it would be carried in a chest, guarded at all times. Beside her, Tyrion wore practical traveling leathers and Brienne was in full armor, sword at her side. Around them milled 100 men handpicked for loyalty and skill. Some were knights from the Vale, others from the north, plus a handful of Crownland's guards. They wore the Queen's sigil on their cloaks, a dire wolf ringed by golden leaves. A small crowd of onlookers gathered to watch them depart. Some of the small folk bowed, others murmured quietly. Sansa took a moment to speak with Captain Ulf and Lady Phalia, who would oversee the capital in her absence. Then she mounted her horse, a steady chestnut mare, and gave the signal. The gates swung open and the column proceeded out of the Red Keep onto the city streets. Trumpeters gave a short, muted call. Sansa caught sight of children running alongside the procession and she forced a reassuring smile. She wanted them to believe in a future without more war. The roads out of King's Landing were well guarded and the journey southward began under mild skies. They traveled in a steady formation, the clatter of hooves and armor echoing along the King's Road. Sansa recalled the last time she had traveled to Storm's End. Actually, she had never truly been there before. She had once dreamed of seeing all the great castles in the realm back when she was a little girl enamored of songs. Now she was traveling as a queen to meet a threat that could plunge the realm back into chaos. They passed the rolling farmland of the Crownlands, fields dotted with budding green. Local folk paused in their work to watch the Queen's retinue ride by. At night, they camped in secure spots or accepted lodging in small keeps that remained loyal to the throne. Sansa kept the mood purposeful, encouraging no drunken revels or lax watch. Each morning, they set off early. The road took them southeast, skirting the storm-lashed coasts, until the imposing fortress of Storm's End finally came into view. Dark stone walls jutted from a cliff face, rising stark against the tumultuous sea behind them. White-capped waves crashed below and black clouds often hovered on the horizon. The architecture was singular in its defiance of the storms, rumored to be magically reinforced to withstand fierce gales. As Sansa and her party approached, they saw a banner of the Faith Militant hanging above the main gate, proof that the neutral watchers had arrived and taken nominal control. Standing at intervals along the battlements were men in black and gold cloaks, likely the sellswords of the Golden Flame, as well as knights in the White Star of the Faith. The sight of those sellswords on Westerosi soil made Sansa's stomach twist with unease. This was not a typical diplomatic reception. A threat lurked behind every stone if the pretender was as treacherous as she suspected. They halted before the gate, where a knight of the Faith Militant stepped forward to greet them. His armor was polished steel, the seven-pointed star etched across his breastplate. He inclined his head respectfully toward Sansa. "Your Grace, I am Ser Marek. We have secured the walls and stand ready to ensure both sides adhere to the terms." Sansa inclined her head in return. "Thank you, Ser. My men and I come in good faith. Is the other party inside?" Ser Marek nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. Igor Blackfire and his retinue arrived yestereve. They number 100 exactly as agreed. He's waiting in the Great Hall." Sansa glanced over her shoulder at Brienne, whose face remained stoic but whose grip on her horse's reins was tight. Tyrion rode on her other side, posture stiff. She turned back to Ser Marek. "Then we shall enter. My 100 men will keep arms within reason, no more. But they will be ready if any mischief arises." Ser Marek stepped aside, and the heavy gates rumbled open. Sansa led the column into Storm's End's formidable courtyard. Despite the Faith's watch, she could feel the tension in the air. Sellswords in dark cloaks lingered at the edges, swords belted, eyes flicking over her men. Her party dismounted. Grooms from the Faith approached to take the horses, offering quiet courtesy. Sansa, Tyrion, and Brienne moved toward the keep's massive doors. A swirl of wind rattled the old iron fittings, reminding them all why this castle was named for storms. Inside, the Great Hall was a large chamber of thick walls and narrow windows to keep out the relentless gales. Torches flickered along the walls, illuminating a table set up near the dais. As Sansa approached, she saw a tall figure at the far end, dressed in black leather with silver trim. He wore no crown, no one would allow that without a fight, but a cloak that bore the black dragon sigil. He was flanked by men with hardened faces, likely Sel's word captains. Several Faith Knights stood behind them, watchful. The man turned, and Sansa finally beheld Igor Blackfire II, or Marance, or whatever his true name was. He was of medium build, with dark hair pulled back in a tail, a short beard framing a pale, angular face. His eyes were a stormy gray, the color of steel. He was not handsome in the princely sense, but he carried himself with a certain theatrical dignity. He bowed grandly, though the gesture might have been mocking. "Your Grace, at last we meet. I am Igor, rightful heir to the Iron Throne." Sansa did not curtsy, she merely inclined her head. "I am Sansa of House Stark, queen in the south by the will of the lords of Westeros. If you come in peace, let us talk. If you come to make false claims, let us end this now." He smiled thinly. "So cold, my queen? May I call you Sansa?" He paused as if expecting a reaction. When none came, he continued, "I have heard of your beauty and grace, but I see you also possess a spine of iron." "Good. I would not have it otherwise." He offered a hand as if to guide her to a seat at the table. She ignored the gesture. "Spare the flattery, Lord Igor. You claim descent from House Blackfire, an offshoot of Targaryen bastardy. If you have proof, present it." His smile faltered. One of his men stepped forward with a satchel. From it he withdrew a collection of parchments, old genealogies, and a signet ring with faint traces of a dragon shape. Sansa watched as the man laid them out on the table. Tyrion joined her, his eyes narrowing as he examined the documents. Igor spread his arms. "Here is the lineage. My great-grandsire fled Westeros after the last Blackfire rebellion, taking refuge in Essos. The ring belonged to Demon Blackfire himself, given to my ancestor in recognition of his direct blood ties. As you can see, the genealogical line is unbroken." Tyrion made a small, skeptical sound in his throat. "I've forged documents better than these in my time. This proves little." Igor laughed softly, a low chuckle that echoed off the stone walls. "I expected such doubt. But let us not dwell on whether the blood is pure. Blood is easily debated. What matters is that I carry the rightful banner, a heritage that some lords in Westeros still revere. We need not be enemies, Queen Sansa. Together we could reunite the 7 kingdoms under a single banner, wolf and dragon, a new dynasty that erases the bitterness of old wars. Sansa felt a stab of anger that he presumed to speak of uniting the realm while brandishing a false dragon claim. Still, she maintained her composure. You speak of uniting, but you brought 1,000 cells words to our shores. He inclined his head. Insurance, my queen. After all, you have armies at your disposal. I am not fool enough to wander into your presence unprotected. But we need not clash. Indeed, I once proposed marriage, why not revisit that idea? Our union would ensure no further conflict. The small folk might welcome a return to the Targaryen mystique. Before Sansa could reply, Brienne's voice cut in, icy. You assume too much. The queen is not in need of your forces or your mystique. She rules. You are the one seeking recognition. Igor's gaze flicked to Brienne, a faint sneer curling his lips. You must be Ser Brienne of Tarth, yes? Renowned for your loyalty, though not for your courtesy. Careful how you speak to royalty. Sansa stepped forward, anger rising. Ser Brienne speaks with my voice. You will show her respect. Now, let us be clear, I am here to prevent bloodshed. But I will not be cowed by your intimidation or your illusions of grandeur. If you truly want to avoid war, disband your company and pledge loyalty to the crown. He studied her face as if searching for any hint of yielding. In other words, kneel and ask for your favor. That's your offer. That is the only offer, Sansa said. If you will not kneel, you can return to Essos. A murmur ran through his men. Some clutched their hilts. The Faith Knights behind them tensed, aware that violence could erupt if tempers flared. Igor drummed his fingers on the table. I see. This is less a negotiation and more a dismissal. Yet you invited me here under terms that suggested you would at least consider a peaceful agreement. Is it so mad to imagine we share rule? You, Queen of the North by your father's name, me, scion of the Targaryen line, bridging the gap left by Daenerys? Sansa's voice hardened. Daenerys Targaryen left us a legacy of ashes. The city still bears the scars. Westeros wants no more tyrants with illusions of destiny. Igor's smile turned brittle. You brand me tyrant before I've ruled a day. Perhaps that's why I need an army, to cut through such slander. Tyrion stepped in, raising a placating hand. Shall we step back from rhetoric? The question is, are you willing to relinquish your claim to the throne in exchange for some form of peace? Her Grace might consider granting you a lesser lordship, a chance to integrate peacefully. Igor's eyes flashed with contempt. A lesser lordship? You would offer me a patch of land like a beggar's crumb? I am a dragon. My line was robbed. My ancestors died for the throne. I will not accept scraps. Brienne shifted, her armor clinking. Then you have chosen war. Silence fell, thick enough to taste. On the dais, the wind outside battered the walls. A distant howl audible through the arrow slits. Igor's men tensed and Sansa's guards mirrored them. One spark could ignite a bloodbath. Sansa kept her chin high, her pulse pounding. She would not be the first to draw steel, this was a parley. But she had no intention of surrendering to blackmail. The Faith Knights eyed them all warily. Igor exhaled, feigning a resigned sigh. War is never my first choice, Queen Sansa. Surely you see that. But if you will not see reason, if you insist on calling me pretender, then we have little left to discuss. Still, I will make a final offer, wed me in Storm's End, here and now, so the lords of Westeros see the union of wolf and dragon. We will co-rule, keep the realm from further strife. The line of Targaryen will not be overshadowed by the Stark's convenient claims. Sansa felt fury surge in her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. She recalled the handful of times she had been forced into betrothals she never wanted, Joffrey, Tyrion, even the rumor of Willis Tyrell at one point. She was done being a pawn. No, she said softly but clearly, each syllable resonating. I will not be threatened or seduced into an alliance with the Sellsword army. This is my final word. You may lay down your arms and swear fealty. If you do, I will spare you, perhaps even grant you some lordship if your service proves honorable in time. If you refuse, leave these shores at once. Igor's face grew stormy. His Sellsword captain scowled, hands creeping closer to swords. The Faith Knights adjusted stances. The tension coiled, ready to snap. Tyrion's expression was taut as a bowstring. Brienne took a half-step forward, placing herself in front of Sansa just enough to shield her if blades were drawn. For a breathless moment, the hall seemed on the verge of chaos. Then Igor laughed, a sharp, humorless bark. You have spirit, I'll grant you that. Very well, Sansa Stark. I see you cannot be swayed, but do not think I'll slink away like a whipped cur. The next time we meet, it will be on the battlefield, unless you come to your senses. He straightened, addressing the Faith Knights. We are done here. My men and I will leave Storm's End by dawn, abiding by our pledge not to spill blood in your presence. But after that, we are free to settle matters by steel if the Queen refuses to yield. Ser Marek, the Faith Knight who had escorted them, stepped forward. We agreed to neutrality in this parley, so no bloodshed will be shed under this roof. But if you break your vow after leaving, the wrath of the Faith may follow. Igor scoffed. The Faith is divided, good Ser. There are those who yearn for the return of the rightful bloodline. Some might side with me. I would not count them all as your allies. He turned back to Sansa. We will leave you to your illusions, my queen. I hope for your sake you find an alliance that can defend you from dragon fire. With that final barb, he gestured to his men. As a group, they turned and walked out of the hall. The Faith Knights followed, ensuring no foul play. Sansa stood still, her heart thudding in her chest, the echoes of confrontation ringing in her ears. She felt Tyrion at her side, a protective presence, and Brienne's readiness at her back. When the room was clear, Tyrion let out a breath. Well, that ended more peaceably than I expected, which is to say no one died on the spot. But the die is cast, he'll seek war. Sansa sank into a nearby chair, the tension draining from her limbs. We have no illusions now. He won't bend. We must prepare the realm for the possibility of invasion. She glanced at Brienne. See to it that our men remain on guard tonight. We leave Storm's End at first light. If he's going to muster an army, we need to return to King's Landing to coordinate defenses. Brienne nodded resolutely. Tyrion rubbed his temples. We should also alert the lords of the Westerlands, the Reach, the Vale, the Stormlands, everyone. A new war could be upon us sooner than we hoped. Sansa closed her eyes, a rush of weariness threatening to overwhelm her. She had tried for peace, but the pretenders' lust for power meant there was no compromise. Another conflict loomed, and the realm would suffer for it. But she could not shrink from this duty. If she faltered, thousands could die. Summoning her resolve, she rose from the chair, her spine straight. Then we have our course. We will rally the realm and show this Blackfire charlatan what it means to face a united Westeros. They spent the night within the bleak walls of Storm's End, each side keeping a wary distance. Sansa slept fitfully in a chamber near the top of the keep, the wind howling through the narrow windows. She dreamt of a dragon's roar echoing over burning fields, of a black banner snapping in the wind, but each time she saw her father's face, calm and composed, reminding her to stand firm in the face of tyranny. She clung to that memory as she woke. Dawn was gray and stormy. Outside, the courtyard was busy with the stir of both camps preparing to depart. The Sellswords under Igor's banner were up early, loading wagons and grooming horses. None approached Sansa's men, and the Faith Knights stood vigil, ensuring no brawl broke out. Within an hour, the Golden Flame contingent rode off, vanishing down the coastal road. They left Storm's End with a final sneer at the watchers. Sansa watched them go from a high window, feeling equal parts relief and foreboding. She wasted no time. Her own retinue assembled in the courtyard, and after brief farewells to the Faith Knights, they rode out as well. The storms battered them as they journeyed north. Rain slashed sideways, turning the roads into mud. More than once they had to slow to a crawl. Sansa remained stoic in the saddle, water streaming down her cloak. Brienne hovered protectively, and Tyrion attempted to lighten the mood with wry observations about the weather. But all of them knew the real storm was the threat of war that loomed on the horizon. After several arduous days, they finally reached King's Landing, bedraggled but unscathed. There Sansa lost no time summoning her council. Word had spread faster than her return. Riders had been sent ahead to warn that war was likely. Already, lords from the Crownlands and the Vale had arrived to hear what must be done. The throne room hummed with urgency when Sansa ascended the dais. She did not sit this time, preferring to stand and address the gathering. My lords, she began, her voice resonating in the vaulted hall, we have had parley with the man calling himself Igor Blackfire too. He refuses to abandon his claim, and we have refused to legitimize it. He has threatened war if we do not submit. We must therefore prepare the realm to defend itself against this Sellsword army. I call upon each region to maintain readiness. We must stand as one if they attempt to invade. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, though Sansa noted pockets of tension. Some lords might still harbor old loyalties or see advantage in chaos. But the majority nodded resolutely. House Royce's representative from the Vale pledged knights. A messenger from House Tarley in the Reach announced they would send foot soldiers. The Crownlands lords bristled at the notion of an invading pretender. Letters were dispatched across the 7 kingdoms, urging them to unite. The North, under her cousin's stewardship, was distant but presumably loyal. Dorne remained aloof yet might be persuaded to lend support if threatened. All these uncertainties swirled, but Sansa pressed on, forging alliances through words and promises. Tyrion, as Hand, took center stage in the subsequent planning. They mapped possible landing sites, the Stormlands beaches, Crackclaw Point in the Crownlands, even the Westerlands if rebellious houses colluded. Garrisons were reinforced, fleets were sent to patrol the coasts, and scouts were dispatched to watch for suspicious ships. Sansa demanded updates daily, determined that no corner of the realm be caught unaware. But wars do not begin overnight. Weeks passed. The tension was palpable, but no new invasion materialized. Igor's forces did not appear on any horizon, nor did news come of them massing in a specific port. It was as if the Sellswords hovered on the edge of the narrow sea, waiting for the right moment to strike or for some advantage to materialize. Ravens from Essos spoke of Igor's attempts to secure more funding, possibly from wealthy magisters or from unscrupulous elements within the free cities. The realm held its breath, poised for the blow that might or might not fall. Meanwhile, Sansa continued to rule. She refused to let the threat paralyze her administration. Grain still needed distributing, roads required maintenance, the city watch had to keep order. If the queen appeared terrified, the people would lose faith. She strove to project confidence at every public appearance, even if inside she felt the tremors of uncertainty. Brienne seldom left her side, and additional guards patrolled the Red Keep's corridors. Tyrion worked tirelessly, an ever-steady presence, negotiating with the Iron Bank to secure emergency funds in case war demanded it. Each day tested Sansa's resolve, yet she did not bend. One particularly tense morning, a new concern arose. Rumors that a segment of the Faith militant was considering throwing its support behind Igor's true Targaryen blood. Sansa had always been cautious about the Faith militant, a revived order that sometimes acted on zeal rather than reason. She called for the High Septon, now chosen by a more moderate group of clergy, to appear at the Red Keep. He arrived wearing the crystal crown that signified his station, accompanied by 2 Septons and 4 Faith militant knights. The tension in the throne room was palpable as they knelt before her dais. "Your Grace," the High Septon said, voice wavering with age, "I have heard the slander that we might turn against you. Let me be clear, we do not condone any rebellion against the rightful queen, especially one that threatens to throw the land into war again." Sansa studied his face, searching for any hint of deception. The man was elderly with kind but weary eyes. She had no reason to doubt his sincerity. He had shown himself to be a stabilizing influence. "I appreciate your words, High Septon. Yet rumors persist that some of the Faith's knights see the Targaryen line as sanctified by the Seven. I need to know where you stand. Will the Faith take arms to defend the realm if this pretender attacks?" He bowed his head. "We stand by the realm, by the peace that you have striven to build. Any within our order who betray that do so against my explicit command. We are not enemies of House Stark." Sansa inclined her head. "Good. I will hold you to that. This man calling himself Igor has invoked the Faith's blessings for his cause in letters to certain lords, claiming the Targaryens were chosen by the Seven. Denounce him openly so the small folk know his claim is false. If we stand united, he'll find no easy foothold." The High Septon signaled his agreement. By the next day, Septons throughout the Crownlands preached sermons that reaffirmed loyalty to Queen Sansa and cautioned against following false dragons. That measure reassured some, but not all. Fear was a stubborn weed. Yet Sansa pressed on, grateful for the Faith's official stance. As another fortnight passed, a sense of taut anticipation stretched across the capital. More lords trickled in, uncertain whether the invasion would come. The Red Keep's halls filled with talk of war. Yet the sea remained unsettlingly quiet. Tyrion speculated that Igor might be waiting for a perfect moment, or perhaps for more gold or more ships. Sansa could only prepare as best she could, ensuring the realm's forces were positioned to respond swiftly wherever he struck. Late one evening, Sansa stood on a tower balcony, gazing out over the city. Torches flickered in the narrow streets below, and the moonlight glimmered on the waters of Blackwater Bay. The wind lifted a strand of her auburn hair, carrying it across her cheek. She closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the long path that had led her here. She remembered the fear she'd known under Joffrey, the heartbreak of losing her family, the nights in the Vale under Littlefinger's manipulations. She'd survived it all, grown stronger with each scar. Now she faced another crisis, one that threatened to unravel the fragile peace she had built. But she did not feel that same trembling terror of youth. She felt only a measured resolve. Footsteps on the stone behind her. She turned to see Tyrion approach, a cloak wrapped around him against the chill. He joined her at the balcony's edge. Below them, the city seemed to sigh in the night air. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts. Each day we wait, uncertain if tomorrow brings an armada of sellswords. The not knowing is worse than an outright attack." He nodded. "Indeed. But your lords are behind you for the most part. They won't rally to a sellsword just for old Targaryen myths. You've shown them stability, prosperity, even if still fragile. It's more than they had under the last war. Some do remember Daenerys's destruction. They won't risk a repeat." Sansa let out a quiet breath. "I hope you're right. But there's always the lure of a lost dynasty, the romance of dragons. Some men cling to such illusions." Tyrion studied her face in the moonlight. "If it comes to open war, we'll fight. And we'll likely win, given the realm's numbers. But many could die in the process. You've tried to avoid that, and it's honorable. But some wars cannot be dodged." She gazed at the harbor lights. "Yes. I just wish there were another way. I've seen too many corpses burned and broken. I fear for the people, especially the small folk who suffer the most in any conflict." Tyrion was silent for a moment, then placed a hand gently on her forearm. "You carry a heavy burden, Sansa, but you do not carry it alone. I stand with you, as do Brienne, Lady Phalia, the lords who pledged their forces. Even the faith has chosen your cause. You are not alone." The wind rustled her hair, and she found comfort in his words. She remembered how once, as a frightened girl, she had despised the idea of being wed to a Lannister dwarf. Now, Tyrion had become a steadfast ally, a friend even, someone whose loyalty was earned through hardship and shared ideals rather than vows of marriage. She offered him a faint smile. "Thank you, Tyrion. That means more than I can say." He gave a short bow, stepping back. "Try to rest, your grace. Tomorrow is another day of vigilance." Sansa nodded, watching him depart. She lingered a while longer, letting the silence and the moonlight soothe her. Eventually, she returned to her chamber, resigned to the fact that her sleep would be uneasy. But she reminded herself of one hard-earned truth. She had faced monstrous kings, cunning manipulators, and unspeakable betrayals. She was still standing, and while the realm rested on a precipice, she would not let it fall without a fight. The next morning brought a sudden development. A raven arrived from the Westerlands, from a loyal informant, reporting that House Estren and 2 other minor houses near Lannisport had openly declared support for Igor Blackfyre. According to the letter, they had raised banners with a black dragon emblazoned, and word was they expected a fleet from Essos to land on the western coast. This changed everything. Sansa immediately called a war council. If Igor planned to land in the Westerlands, likely away from the main royal fleets, he could establish a foothold among sympathetic houses. That would force the crown to scramble, dividing their armies across the realm. Sansa's fists clenched at the map spread on the table, showing the coastline near Lannisport. Tyrion frowned, pointing to a cove. "They might land here. It's less fortified than Lannisport proper. If House Estren is truly in league with them, they could open the gates of their minor keeps to shelter the sellswords. By the time our forces arrive, they'd have a defensible position." Lady Phalia glowered. "Traitors. After all the mercy your grace showed in the Westerlands. They'll regret this." Sansa straightened. "We'll move our forces swiftly. I'll dispatch a host from King's Landing to the Westerlands. We can't let them establish a beachhead unopposed. Tyrion, you'll coordinate with the Navy to send ships around the coast. Ser Brienne, gather enough knights to march west at once. I want a strong presence there, enough to make House Estren think twice about throwing in their lot with this pretender." Brienne bowed. "I'll need 2 weeks to mobilize fully, but I can move sooner with a vanguard. We must be careful not to leave King's Landing defenseless, though." Sansa tapped the map. "Yes, we'll keep a reserve in the capital. But the real threat is at that western shore now. If Igor is truly coming, we must meet him there. I will join the host." A ripple of protest spread among the council. Tyrion raised a hand. Your Grace, it might be wiser for you to remain in King's Landing, orchestrating from a secure position. If you go west, you risk— She cut him off gently. If I hide behind the walls of the Red Keep, the realm might see it as a sign of weakness. I must show the West that I stand with them. I won't ride at the head of the vanguard, but I will be present to direct the larger strategy. My father always said a ruler should lead by example. None could argue the point easily, though Tyrion still looked uneasy. Brienne's face was grim, but she nodded acceptance. The decision was made. Sansa would ride west with a carefully chosen contingent, enough to show resolve without leaving the capital exposed. Over the next few days, the Red Keep bustled with preparations. Armor was polished, wagons loaded with supplies, messages flew to allied lords in the Crownlands and the Reach, calling them to rally at the Gold Road. Sansa wrote letters to her cousin in the north, updating him on the situation, though she did not necessarily expect northern troops to arrive swiftly given the distance. She wanted them forewarned in case the conflict spread further. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The sun climbed pale and hazy over King's Landing as Sansa and her retinue gathered once more in the courtyard. This time the company was larger, nearly 1,000 men, knights and foot soldiers, plus a retinue of supply wagons. Tyrion would remain behind in the capital as hand, ensuring governance continued and that further forces could be dispatched if needed. They shared a private farewell in the solar. Tyrion bowed deeply. "Stay safe, Your Grace. I hope you ride to an easy negotiation, but we both suspect otherwise." Sansa touched his shoulder lightly. "We'll be cautious. Send ravens if anything changes here. And keep the city calm. Panic is our enemy." He smiled wryly. "I've grown adept at feeding the city comforting half-truths. Good luck." In the courtyard, Sansa mounted a dapple gray horse, adjusting her cloak in the crisp morning breeze. Brienne, in gleaming plate, sat astride a towering warhorse, and around them waited lines of banners. The Queen's direwolf fan rose, the Vale's falcon, the Crown's golden lion motif newly minted, and even a few smaller houses that had sworn directly to Sansa. Drums began a solemn cadence. The portcullis groaned open, and Sansa led her host out onto the roads. People lined the streets, cheering or watching in uneasy silence. She tried to keep her expression composed, projecting confidence. They took the Gold Road west, the main route linking King's Landing and the Westerlands. The farmlands soon gave way to rolling hills, the fields dotted with spring flowers. Though the land looked peaceful, the army's slow march reminded Sansa of times when the realm had been torn by war after war: Robert's Rebellion, the War of the Five Kings, the final battles against the Night King, Daenerys' assault on the capital. Now, another war threatened, spurred by a man who had no real right but possessed dangerous ambition. Day after day they traveled, establishing camps at dusk. Sansa made a point of speaking with the soldiers, encouraging discipline and fair behavior toward any small folk they encountered. She remembered how armies in the past had ravaged the countryside. She would not allow that. Brienne set strict rules for conduct, and violations would be punished severely. The soldiers grumbled little, most believed in Sansa's cause, or at least believed in her willingness to see justice done. On the 6th day, a messenger caught up with them, riding hard. He carried news from the west. House Estrin's banners were fully unfurled, and small pockets of Sel's-wards had landed, though not in massive numbers. Skirmishes had already broken out near a minor port. No sign of Igor himself yet, but more ships were rumored to be on the horizon. If the main Golden Flame host arrived, the situation would escalate. Sansa's face was set in grim determination when she heard. She ordered the army to quicken its pace as much as possible without losing cohesion. A week later, they reached the edges of the Westerlands. The once lush region still bore scars from previous conflicts. They found uneasy villages, rumor-laden towns, and lords with varied loyalties. Some rushed to greet the Queen, swearing support. Others remained aloof, unsure. Sansa established a forward base at an old holdfast near the Gold Road, using it to coordinate her forces with those from the Reach who had also begun to gather. Scouts rode in daily with reports of Sel's-ward movements along the coast. The weather turned uncertain, clouds gathering over the coastline. It felt like a mirror of the tension in the air. Soon enough, one of the scouts returned with urgent tidings. A sizable fleet had been spotted off the coast, heading toward a cove near Lannisport. At last, the rumored main force of the Golden Flame seemed prepared to land. Sansa did not wait. She convened her commanders, including Brienne and several Westerlands lords who had declared for her, mapping out how best to intercept them. If they landed unopposed, they could fortify and draw more discontented lords to their side. Sansa resolved to meet them at the shore or as close to it as possible, forcing a confrontation before they dug in. It felt surreal, planning a battle she never wanted. Yet she did so with a cool head. She had grown up hearing about Robb Stark's victories, learning from his mistakes, gleaning insights from the cunning of others. Strategy had been forced upon her through the cruelty of King's Landing. Now, she had an army under her command, and though Brienne and the other experienced knights shaped the maneuvers, Sansa gave the final directives. They marched westward, passing near Lannisport's outlying fields. Smoke was visible in the distance, some skirmish or sabotage by Sellsword raiders, no doubt. Sansa's jaw clenched. She urged the column forward, determined to safeguard whatever families still remained. When they reached a vantage point overlooking the cove, they saw the enemy fleet, nearly 30 ships anchored in the bay, offloading men, horses, and equipment onto a narrow beach. Tents and pavilions were already springing up. Black banners, some with dragon insignias, fluttered in the sea breeze. Brienne and the other commanders joined Sansa on the hillside. One of them, Lord Brax, a Westerland's lord loyal to the Queen, pointed toward the cove. They've chosen a defensible spot. Cliffs on either side, the water at their back. If we attack head-on, we'll be funneled into a narrow front. Brienne narrowed her eyes. We can come around from the north and south, trying to hem them in. But it'll take time to maneuver. If we wait too long, they'll entrench. They'll have pikes and archers set on the ridges. Sansa spoke calmly. Then we must move swiftly. Deploy half our force in a frontal demonstration, enough to keep them busy, while the other half circles to the north. Once they're engaged, the second force hits them from the flank. If we can trap them before they establish a secure camp, we might force a quick rout. The lords nodded. They began barking orders to riders who would signal the troops. Drums rumbled. Horns sounded. The army formed into segments, with Brienne leading the vanguard, Lord Brax commanding the flanking maneuver. Sansa remained on higher ground with a small guard, able to observe and direct. Part of her wanted to be at the front, but she knew her place was to oversee the entire field. Soon, the thunder of hooves and the clang of steel filled the air. The vanguard advanced toward the cove, banners streaming. Below, the Sellswords scrambled to form lines, many still disorganized from disembarking. Clashes erupted in the shallows, men splashing up to their ankles in surf while swords flashed. War cries tore through the salt-laced wind. Sansa's heart pounded in her chest as she watched. She felt no thrill, only dread at the inevitable bloodshed. Yet this was the cost of facing the Pretender's aggression. A standard bearing the Black Skull Dragon was visible among the Sellswords. Archers scrambled onto the cliffs, loosing arrows at the charging knights. Some riders fell, horses screeching. Brienne led a group of knights with formidable discipline, shields raised against the arrow storm, pressing forward. The beach turned into a chaotic melee. In the distance, Sansa saw the second force emerging from behind a rocky outcrop, banners fluttering, Lord Brax's men sweeping in to catch the Sellswords' flank. A horn blast signaled the flanking assault. The Sellswords turned in confusion, lines wavering. Sansa willed them to yield, to break, anything to end the fighting quickly. But they fought fiercely, perhaps believing their new paymaster offered them fortune or glory. The clang of weapons rang across the beach. Smoke drifted from torches set to supply wagons. The world was a swirl of mud, blood, and salt spray. Some Sellswords began to flee toward the ships, but a few boats had pushed off, perhaps in panic or at the captain's orders. They were left stranded between the sea and two converging forces. Sansa spotted a cluster of them forming a shield wall near a jagged outcrop, the black banner still aloft. She peered closer, straining to see if Igor was among them, though she doubted it. This was not the entire Golden Flame, presumably. He might be landing elsewhere or waiting for the outcome. With methodical pressure, Brienne's knights and Lord Brax's flanking force tightened the noose. The Sellswords' initial resistance collapsed into a rout. Men tossed down weapons, scrambling across the rocks to escape. Some sank to their knees, hands raised in surrender. Others dove into the churning surf, hoping to swim to the ships. A few pockets still resisted, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Sansa raised a hand, signaling the standard-bearer to sound the victory horn. The echoes boomed across the cove. The battle had lasted less than an hour, but its toll was evident. Bodies littered the shore, the what? frothing pink where men had fallen. Some Sellswords huddled in terrified groups. Sansa's captains began taking prisoners, ensuring discipline among the triumphant soldiers. She could see Brienne in the distance, helmet removed, directing efforts to search for any high-ranking enemy officers. The black banner was torn from its pole and cast onto the sand. Sansa descended toward the beach, accompanied by her guard. The acrid stench of blood and seawater filled her nostrils. She moved carefully around the fallen, each form a testament to the tragedy of war. She wanted to kneel and close their eyes, but time was pressing. She found Brienne among a cluster of knights. The tall knight's armor was streaked with grime, her blonde hair damp with sweat. "Your Grace," Brienne said, bowing slightly. "We've taken at least 300 prisoners. Many more are dead or fled into the sea. We saw no sign of Igor or his top captains. This may have been a forward landing." Sansa nodded, scanning the aftermath with grim acceptance. "We must prepare for the possibility of more landings. Still, this is a blow to their plan. Make sure the prisoners are treated fairly. If any among them wish to lay down arms for good, we'll consider leniency. Those who remain defiant we'll keep confined." Brienne signaled some knights to begin the process. Sansa turned to the battered Sellswords, many of whom looked battered and exhausted. She cleared her throat, lifting her voice. "To those who surrender, you fought for coin and false promises. This war need not claim your lives. If you swear never again to take arms against the crown, you will be spared. If you refuse, you'll remain prisoners." A hush greeted her words. Several Sellswords, bruised and bloody, nodded in desperate relief. Others hung their heads in shame. A few spat curses. But the majority looked ready to abandon this doomed cause. She would have to be cautious, some might only pretend to yield. Still, better that than butchery. She despised needless slaughter. Her next step was to question any captive officers about Igor's plans, but none seemed to know his exact location. They only repeated that more ships were expected, that the main force might land further north or perhaps at Case. Sansa felt a pang of frustration. The realm would be forced to chase these landings up and down the coast unless she found a decisive way to corner the pretender. Over the next few days, she fortified the cove, posted lookouts along the shoreline, and tended to the wounded. Ravens flew back and forth with updates to King's Landing and other allied forces. Smaller skirmishes erupted elsewhere, but none so large as the first. It seemed the Golden Flame was testing multiple landing sites. Rumors spread that House Estrin had sheltered Sellswords inland, though no sign of a large, cohesive invasion yet. Sansa realized that Igor might be employing guerrilla tactics, forcing her forces to spread thin. The West was turning into a chessboard of scattered fights. In this environment of uncertainty, Sansa decided she needed a more direct tactic. If Igor wanted to claim the throne, he'd eventually have to appear in person to rally his followers. She resolved to deny him the chance to gather strength, cutting off any local support. She ordered a sweep through the territory of known or suspected traitor lords, compelling them to publicly renounce the Blackfire claim or face royal judgment. A few houses surrendered meekly when her men arrived, unwilling to risk destruction. Others fled, leaving their keeps empty. The slow crackdown further fragmented Igor's support network. Time dragged, the tension wearing on everyone. Reports trickled in. A Sellsword band was crushed in the northern hills. Another attempted landing near Case but was repelled by local defenders. A handful of knights returned to Sansa's camp with trophies of captured black banners, each one more frayed than the last. Yet no sign of Igor. Her patience wore thin. She wondered if the man was deliberately avoiding battle, hoping to wear her forces down with scattered engagements until a more opportune moment. She spent her nights in command tents or borrowed keeps, the heavy weight of command preventing real rest. Brienne was tireless, riding out personally to lead or coordinate the next skirmish. Sansa consulted with lords who had experience in warfare, cross-referencing maps, searching for patterns in the enemy movements. If only she could corner the man who styled himself as the rightful heir, force him into a final confrontation. The realm could not endure a drawn-out campaign of raids. Finally, a breakthrough came when one of the Queen's Rangers captured an officer carrying messages from Igor to House Estrin. Under interrogation, a method Sansa insisted be humane, though thorough, the officer admitted Igor planned to rally all remaining Sellswords and traitor forces at a ruined fortress near the coastal cliffs, planning a last stand or a push inland. This fortress was old, half-forgotten, and presumably off the main roads, which explained why he believed he could gather there without immediate detection. With this intelligence, Sansa called an emergency war council. The best chance to end this threat was to strike swiftly before Igor's scattered forces could unite in strength. At dawn the next day, Sansa led her combined host, now reinforced by additional troops from the Crownlands, to the fortress in question, marching under the guidance of the ranger who knew the terrain. They traveled by winding coastal paths, hoping to avoid early detection. The final stretch took them through a dense pine forest, and the smell of salt mingled with resin in the chilly air. When they emerged onto a rocky plateau overlooking the sea, they spotted the ancient fortress perched on a cliff, battered by ages of wind and rain. Sure enough, tents and men were visible within the crumbling walls. Black banners snapped in the breeze. This time, Sansa was certain Igor was there. The moment had arrived. Her commanders quietly deployed the army, encircling the ruin. Archers took positions on overlooking ridges. Cavalry and infantry formed a blockade on the single landward approach. Sansa stood with Brienne and Lord Brax, observing from a vantage point behind the line. The plan was to demand surrender. If Igor refused, they'd storm the fortress. With superior numbers and the element of surprise, they might end the war in one decisive strike. A trumpet call echoed across the cliffs, carrying the Queen's demand for parley. For a long moment, the fortress was silent. Then, on the half-collapsed gate tower, a figure appeared, raising a black banner. It had to be Igor. Sansa's pulse pounded, her breath catching in her chest. She signaled for the standard-bearer to wave the white flag for negotiation, though they stood prepared for a trap. A few minutes later, a small group emerged from the gate, stepping onto the rocky field. Sansa rode forward with a modest escort. Brienne, a handful of knights, and her banner-bearer. They halted 20 paces from the approaching group, each side on edge. She saw him clearly now. Igor in black leather, a sword at his hip, face set in grim determination. His dark hair whipped in the wind. He was accompanied by a bearded captain and a standard-bearer holding the black dragon flag. Sansa's guard leveled spears, ready to defend if needed. She dismounted, and Igor did the same. They stood facing each other across a short span of rocky ground, the sea pounding the cliffs below. "You have guts to come here," Igor said, voice raised over the wind. "But your men won't find an easy victory in those walls." "My words are not so quick to yield." Sansa lifted her chin. "There's no victory for you here, Igor. Your forces are scattered or defeated. I offer you one final chance to surrender. Lay down arms and you may live. Continue and you die here." He laughed, though it was tinged with bitterness. "You think you've already won? I still have hundreds of men in that fortress. We can hold off a siege. Reinforcements might come from the sea. Or perhaps some of your so-called allies will turn on you. The game is not over." Sansa studied him, seeing desperation in his eyes. Maybe he believed he could still spark a rebellion. Maybe he simply refused to face defeat. "A game? We are well past games, Igor. This realm has bled enough. Surrender or face your end." He spat on the ground, glancing at Brienne's imposing figure. "You dare threaten a true heir of Aegon the Conqueror? The gods will see justice done. One day the dragon will return to." She cut him off, her tone cold as ice. "There are no dragons left to save you. Only words, many of whom are dead or captured. Let your men see reason before more blood is shed." A distant horn sounded from the fortress walls. Igor's standard-bearer shifted. Brienne's hand fell to her sword. The wind blasted them in a sudden gust, swirling dust and grit. Igor glared, his eyes flicking between Sansa's guard and the lines of soldiers in the distance. With a snarl, he drew his sword. "Then come take me, Wolf Queen. Prove your might." For a heartbeat, the world hung in quiet tension. Then Brienne shouted for the guard to protect Sansa. Igor lunged forward, sword flashing. But Brienne interposed herself, shield raised, deflecting his blow. Sansa stepped back, heart hammering, as swords leapt from scabbards on both sides. A furious melee erupted around them, the bearded word captain slashing at one of Sansa's knights, while the standard-bearer tried to flank them. The Queen's guards rushed in, forming a protective circle. Igor whirled on Brienne, steel clashing on steel in a flurry of blows. The man was skilled, but Brienne was a veteran of countless battles. Their swords rang out in sharp echoes. Sparks flew as metal bit metal. Sansa tried to pull back to safety, but the ground was uneven, and men scuffled in close quarters. She nearly stumbled. One of Igor's men lunged for her, eyes wild, but a loyal knight knocked him aside. Brienne hammered at Igor's defense, forcing him backward. The black-clad pretender snarled, launching a desperate thrust that Brienne parried. She feinted high, then swung low, striking his thigh. He hissed in pain, staggering as blood spattered the rocky ground. Undeterred, he tried another savage slash, but Brienne caught his blade on her shield and shoved him off balance. Igor slipped on the gravel, falling to one knee. Brienne's sword was at his throat in a flash. Around them, the fighting stilled as the Sellsword captain was disarmed and the standard-bearer pinned. Sansa's knights loomed, panting, weapons drawn. The wind whipped again, carrying the salty tang of the sea. For a moment, no one spoke. Brienne pressed the blade lightly against Igor's neck. "Yield," she commanded, voice hard. He glared up at Sansa. Blood trickled from his leg wound. "You'd kill me here, unarmed? You are no queen." Sansa stepped forward slowly, forcing herself to remain composed. She looked down at the man who had threatened her reign, caused countless deaths, and refused every offer of peace. "I gave you chance after chance," she said softly. "You chose war. Now your rebellion ends." He bared his teeth in a final sneer. "Your father was too honorable. That's why he lost his head in this city. But you're more ruthless than he ever was. Perhaps you deserve the throne." Brienne tensed, sword still at his throat. "Your Grace, give the order." Sansa stared at him, the final vestige of a false Targaryen dream. Part of her wanted to order his execution on the spot to snuff out any hope that he'd resurface. Another part remembered her father's teachings about justice, about hearing a man's last plea. Yet she had done so many times over. He had refused every peaceful option. If she spared him, he would be a perpetual threat. If she imprisoned him, his supporters might rally again. Executing him risked martyring him, but letting him live risked further war. The realm could not afford endless conflict. She closed her eyes for half a moment, then reopened them, voice steady. "Igor Blackfire, for treason against the crown, for the blood spilled, for the countless attempts to overthrow lawful rule, I sentence you to death." Brienne's sword flicked. The blow was clean. Igor Blackfire fell to the ground, lifeless, his blood staining the rocks red as it seeped toward the cliff's edge. Wind howled across the battleground, and the standard-bearer crumpled in defeat. The Sellsword captain, disarmed and subdued, hung his head. It was over. The black dragon was slain. Sansa stood motionless, her heart pounding in her ears. She felt no triumph, only a deep sorrow that it had come to this. But she would not flinch from what had been necessary. Around her, her guards exhaled, tension draining from their stances. The sea crashed below as if punctuating the moment. Brienne lowered her sword, blood dripping from the blade. A few heartbeats later, a cry rang out from the fortress walls. Then came silence. Some of the men inside might flee, others might surrender now that their leader was dead. Sansa cleared her throat, forcing her voice to carry. "Lay down arms, and you will be spared." Her words echoed off the cliffs. Slowly, forms appeared at the broken battlements. Sellswords raising empty hands, letting weapons clatter on the stones. The last flickers of rebellion died. The war council regrouped. Sansa issued orders for the fortress to be secured, prisoners taken, contraband seized. The body of Igor Blackfire, the so-called rightful heir, was wrapped in a plain cloth. She considered burning him at sea, but decided a quiet burial would suffice. She wanted no shrine or relic left behind for future pretenders. Brienne supervised the search, ensuring no stragglers lingered. With that, the final threat of the Blackfire name was extinguished. Sansa gazed out at the sea, the late afternoon sun piercing through a crack in the clouds, illuminating the water in gold. She thought of the lives lost, the families displaced, the resources spent. Another war had been forced upon the realm. She prayed it would be the last time a pretender invoked the dragon mystique to sow chaos. But if it happened again, she would meet it. She was not the girl who once trembled at the sight of a king's whims. She was the queen who had stood against every storm. In the days that followed, Sansa saw to the aftermath with characteristic diligence. She offered amnesty to Sellswords who swore fealty, cracked down on traitor lords, and reintegrated the Westerlands into a stable peace. Slowly, the region relaxed. Lannisport reopened, ships sailed without fear of black banners, and the memory of the false dragon began to fade. Through it all, Sansa maintained her poise, dedicating herself to healing the wounds of war once more. The realm's watchers returned to their tasks of rebuilding. She would not allow the scars to fester. When she finally returned to King's Landing, weeks after the final confrontation, the city greeted her with cautious celebration. The small folk cheered, relieved that no new devastation had befallen them. The courtiers whispered about the queen who had personally overseen the downfall of another Targaryen pretender. Sansa met Tyrion in the throne room. He bowed deeply, relief shining on his face. "Your Grace, I'm glad to see you safely returned. The city is anxious for news." She recounted the final battle and the pretender's death. Tyrion listened in silence, then gave a solemn nod. "I suspect that will be the end of any further Blackfire claims. Word has already spread and the lords are breathing easier." Sansa glanced up at the simpler steel throne, the seat that replaced the melted iron throne. She felt the weight of the realm settle on her shoulders anew. "Peace is fragile, Tyrion. We've bought it with blood again. But maybe now we can strengthen it so no more false dragons rise." He smiled gently. "If anyone can, it's you, Sansa Stark." She ascended the dais and took her seat, feeling the cool metal against her back. She remembered the first time she sat there, the hush of the great September coronation. Now more than ever, she understood that queenship was not about wearing crowns or silks, it was about shouldering the burdens of thousands. She did so willingly, knowing the alternative was chaos. Lifting her head, she addressed the small council that had gathered, her voice carrying a note of resolved calm. "We've a realm to tend. Let us see it done." So the days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Under Sansa's continued guidance, King's Landing and the wider realm began the slow process of healing once more. Trade routes stabilized, harvests came in, and the scars from the brief war with the Golden Flames started to fade. House Estrin was stripped of lands and titles, replaced by a lord more loyal to the crown. Other traitors faced justice. The small folk found reassurance in a queen who would fight to protect them, yet who also showed mercy to those who yielded. No songs would be written celebrating the end of the false dragon, for it was no glorious saga, merely another test in a realm weary of battles. Yet in the hush of taverns or the flicker of hearth fires, people spoke of the Wolf Queen who would not be broken. They said she was half steel, half grace, as unyielding as the North and as compassionate as the best southern queens who had ever reigned. From the North came occasional letters from her cousin describing how winter's breath was already creeping in. He invited her again to visit once the realm was settled. She sent word that she longed to see Winterfell, but her duty kept her in the south for the time being. The North stood as its own strong bulwark, a place she loved yet could no longer call home in the same way. Her home was here, in the capital she had once hated, where she now strove each day to ensure a better future. On one calm afternoon, many moons after the last cell's word had been expelled, Sansa wandered the Red Keep's gardens. The flowers were in bloom, vibrant in the warm sunshine. She passed a bed of pale roses, recalling how she had once admired such flowers in Marjorie Tyrell's company. How far she'd come from that innocent girl dreaming of courtly love. Now she was a queen who had weathered storms and faced false dragons, forging alliances and administering justice. There was sorrow in her heart for the price paid, but also pride in what she had preserved. Brienne approached from a shaded path, armor replaced by a simpler tunic, though she still wore a sword at her hip. "Your Grace," she said, smiling softly, "Maester Baldric wishes to finalize the plans for the new orphanages. Are you ready to meet with him?" Sansa nodded, a contentment settling over her features. "Yes, of course. Let's see it done. We can't let the children of war grow up without hope." Brienne bowed slightly, then fell into step as Sansa strolled among the roses. The queen in the south paused to gently touch a blossom, inhaling its delicate scent. She thought of the children now free from the grip of yet another war, the realm that had once teetered on the edge of ruin, and the uncertain future that still beckoned. At least for now, there was peace. At least for now, the realm could breathe. She let the bloom go, turning her gaze forward. A breeze stirred her hair, and she heard the distant hum of life thriving within the city walls. It was not the north's wind in the pines, but she had come to love it in her own way. Step by step, she moved onward toward the duty that called her. She carried her name, Sansa Stark, the queen in the south, with the quiet confidence born of trials survived. No matter what lay ahead, she would stand as a safeguard against the ghosts of the past, forging a legacy that might one day eclipse the violence. For the moment, that was enough. She walked on, the roses swaying gently behind her, bright and unwavering in the sun.